Chapter 1688. In the current Destiny, Kaya was one of the more senior members. She had once been in the same stronghold as Long Gang and had been rescued by the magically powered warriors of the underwater city. Afterwards, she had secretly joined Destiny with Long Gang. Come to think of it, Kaya had already served the organization for over 20 years. The moment her identity was revealed, everyone present could not help but be surprised. Of course, most of them were surprised by Kaya's actions of covering her face and participating in the meeting. "Alright, explain yourself now." After revealing Kaya's identity, the man said sternly, "Just what is Josher's value that we have to sacrifice so much to save him? Is it just because he's your husband and you, Kaya, are one of the founding members of the organization?" Kaya could not help but frown. If she did not answer this question properly, she would probably plant bad seeds in the organization. After the incident with Long Gang, the organization was in turmoil, and their morale was at its lowest. Enough. Master Karen tapped the crutch in his hand. The matter of rescuing Josher was decided after a discussion between Long Gang and I. If you don't trust him in this matter, that means you don't trust me and Long Gang. Do you think Long Gang is someone who would act on his own for personal gain? He saved you. He saved most of you here. You know better than me what Long Gang is like. Master. The man bellowed out in disbelief. Alright, I'll speak. Kaya sucked in a deep breath and looked at everyone. She said sternly, I'll tell you the reason. Kaya? Master Karen frowned. Master, it's all because of the organization. He sacrificed his companion for everyone. There's nothing to hide. Kaya shook her head. I believe that many people here know that my husband, Josher, is a researcher in Astral 6. We also vaguely know that Astral 6 hides the secret of the Emperor controlling and enslaving the people of the underwater city. It's very likely that Josher already knows this secret. Really? The scene was filled with whispers of discussion. However, the man who had revealed Kaya's identity said furiously, Are you joking? You and Josher have been together for almost 20 years. Your child is almost an adult. Don't tell me you didn't know about this all along? However, Kaya walked up to him and met his furious gaze, not backing down at all. Josher is a secret researcher in Astral 6. He's probably the emperor of the underwater city. He needs to keep everything a secret. He even needs to guard against me, his wife. If it wasn't for the incident with Astral 6 and his capture by the royal government, I wouldn't even have known about this. You don't have to trust me, but do you not even trust Long Gang? He's your brother. The man sneered and said, Don't think I don't know this secret. He is your brother. For you, he was willing to take the risk and rescue your husband. What's so strange about that? Kaya stared at him coldly. Faced with how aggressive he was right now, she suddenly said emotionlessly, 3 years ago, when you were being pursued by the military, who was it that risked his heart almost being pierced to save you? Who was it that was on his last breath when he returned, but he still carried you back? The man instinctively shifted his gaze away from Kaya. He gritted his teeth and said, He's a hybrid of the sirens anyway. His vitality is naturally much greater than ours. Who knows if he didn't do that for his own reputation? Kaya did not say anything. She simply delivered a knee strike. The attack was sudden and vicious, directly knocking the man to the ground. He vomited blood as his body twitched. He was in excruciating pain. He saved you. Your life should have been his. Now, I'm taking it back for him. Kaya's face was cold. She did not hide the killing intent in her eyes at all. She drew her gun from her waist and directly pressed it against the man's forehead. The man trembled in fear, but he said hysterically, I've also done meritorious deeds for Destiny. I've also risked my life. What right do you have to kill me? Why is it that your husband is worth saving, but my wife and the people who are still suffering in the mines aren't worth saving? What's the point of keeping Destiny like this? He even extended his hand to grab Kai Ya's gun and pressed it against his forehead. Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Why don't you kill me? Kill me! What are you all doing? Separate them! Master Karen could not watch this any longer. Her furious voice rang out before everyone. Only then did the men snap out of their stupor. They shivered before quickly rushing over and separating the two of them with great effort. The kingdom's government is as stable as iron, but we're having internal strife. Have you forgotten what you said before you joined the organization? Master Karen said furiously. Lock them up. No one is allowed to let them out before we calm down. A man heard that and could only walk before Kaya. He said softly, I'm sorry. Kaya sighed. She loosened her grip and the gun slipped from her hand, falling to the ground. She closed her eyes and allowed them to take her away. The discussion this time was probably unable to continue. Seeing this, Master Karen could only dismiss everyone for now. The members of Destiny all had different identities. They lived in different places in the underwater city and had different occupations. Some of them had left their posts for too long, which would easily raise suspicion. The secret room used for gathering was now empty. Only Master Karen and the young man who had helped Kaya in the beginning remained. Kong Hai, do you think Destiny should lay low for a while? Master Karen constantly rubbed the handle of her cane as she raised her head to look at the young man beside her. Kong Hai was the young man's name. However, the young man said, the greatest problem with Destiny is that they've never seen hope. This uneasiness will only wear away at their passion as time goes on. Even if they lay low, even if they nurture a new batch of people. But how long do you have to wait for someone like Long Gang to appear? Master Karen remained silent. The young man continued slowly, Long Gang's value doesn't lie in his abilities. It also lies in his relationship with the Siren race. To be honest, losing Long Gang is a loss that Destiny won't be able to make up for in 100 years. You mean we still have to save him? Master Karen could not help but frown deeply. That's up to you, Kong Hai said indifferently. After all, you're the leader of Destiny. Master Karen laughed bitterly. I don't have the right. I've just been a coward. I've been hiding until now. I've only picked up this hot potato because I've waited until those who can bring me hope died. Kong Hai said emotionlessly, the dead have no value. Only the living have value. Being able to live until now is a talent in itself. Master Karen shook his head. After a long moment of silence, he seemed to have made a decision and said in a low voice, the palace gave me a notice before, asking me to enter the palace to teach a student. You can be my assistant and come with me to the palace. At this time, Kong Hai frowned and asked curiously, student? Who is it? Master Karen shook his head. I don't know, but this order was directly given by that witch. The military police were even dispatched, and the notice was sent directly to my house. My housekeeper must have been scared out of her wit. When do you plan to go? Kong Hai asked again. Master Karen thought for a while and said, tomorrow morning. It's too late today. Kong Hai nodded. Then I'll go back and prepare. Go. Master Karen waved his hand. I'll stay here for a while, to think about something. When they saw Riaz before Boss Luo and Miss Maid could speak, this young man wrapped in gauze bowed his head apologetically. I'm sorry. I've implicated you. I'm really sorry. Why do you say that? Riaz smiled bitterly. It must be because of Asla. I know what happened to Asla during the competition. That's not the technology of our underwater city. You see, even I can see it. How can the kingdom's government's technicians not know? Boss Luo smiled. Even so, it's not your fault. Riaz opened his mouth. Boss Luo sat down. You see, after we agreed to be your support, we began to modify your serpent. In fact, before the modification, we were already prepared to be discovered and thought of some consequences. Then why did you? Boss Luo smiled. We are merchants. Merchants have to do business. This modification of Asla can be said to be an advertisement. You should understand that no matter how good the description is, it's not as intuitive as actually seeing it once. So, Riaz reacted instantly, your technology has been noticed by His Majesty? Miss Maid continued, Riaz, now we are temporarily staying in the palace as VIPs. But it's not convenient to disclose business matters to you. Riaz nodded, it's okay. As long as I didn't implicate you. Luoqiu suddenly asked, you don't blame us for using you to participate in the serpent competition? Riaz bitterly smiled and said, just like you said, everyone has to be responsible for their own words and actions. Back then, when I asked you to help me participate in the tournament, I should have considered many things. The good side, the bad side, I should have considered them all. But I'm too young, so I can't blame anyone. Besides, because of Asla White Qilin, I've already competed with His Majesty to the end. This is something unimaginable in the past. Let's just treat it as a draw. If you think it's fair, then that's good. Boss Luo smiled casually. Riaz said helplessly, but if there's a next time, can you tell me in advance? When Asla suddenly spoke to me, it really scared me. What did it call itself? White God. Don't worry about it. Miss Maid smiled slightly and said, that's just a defective thing. Because it's defective in itself, it's easily angered and arrogant. Riaz was stunned, but he didn't dare to ask more. The magical thing hidden in Asla was probably what these two used to make a deal with His Majesty, right? Unfortunately, now Asla has been taken back by the kingdom's government. Riaz said apologetically, will this cause you losses? If the kingdom's technical personnel crack the technology on Asla, then your business with His Majesty will. Miss Maid said indifferently, how long has it taken for the underwater city to develop its magical technology to this point? Riaz said subconsciously, magical technology has existed before the Age of Destruction. Including the current underwater city, I'm afraid it's at least. Well, I don't know how long it's been. They need at least the same amount of time to make a new Asla White Qilin. Hearing this big sister's confident words, Riaz couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't doubt it, but he became more curious in his heart. You? Who are you? Merchants who sell everything. This time, it was the boss's answer. Also, we sell products to every customer, even every person, as long as they sincerely want to trade with us. Riaz shook his head. What a strange rule. Are all the merchants in the surface world like this? Boss Luo smiled and said, speaking of which, the business model of the underwater city may be better than the business model of the surface world now. Riaz's eyes lit up. Can you tell me about the surface world? The Academy has few records about the surface world. Even if there is, it's the environment before the underwater city sank. To what extent has the surface world developed now? By the way, apart from mobile phones, are there any other technologies? Boss Luo glanced at Riaz and suddenly asked, you seem to have something on your mind, right? Riaz was startled, then he smiled bitterly and nodded. A lot of things have happened. My mind is in a mess now. I can't sort it out, so I want to do something to divert my attention. Boss Luo smiled and said, if you think it's okay, we can be your audience. Riaz subconsciously opened his mouth. But in an instant, some kind of resistance signal in his body suddenly jumped. It was just that this kind of jump came and went quickly. He immediately felt that it didn't matter even if he said it out loud. So, Riaz opened his mouth and said helplessly, well, after seeing His Majesty the Emperor today, I seem to have inexplicably become the Prince of the Underwater City. ############################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################################### Chapter 1689. In an upside-down and chaotic space full of stairs and corridors, a figure in white was sitting cross-legged in the air. In front of her, an ancient sword was hanging straight, making a slight sound from time to time. Too quiet would drive people crazy. The sound of the sword was a relatively good thing. Chinchiu didn't stop until she had explored this space for a long time. She couldn't find the exit, nor could she figure out a way to break it. She just kept calm. However, in this special space, there was no spiritual qi at all. But relatively speaking, the power in her body wouldn't dissipate for no reason. With her cultivation, it was easy for her to abstain from food. Gongsun Wua and Gong Fanxing were imprisoned in the Penglai treasure house for 500 years. They didn't eat or drink, but they were still vigorous. Qin Chuyu slowly woke up from the state of meditation, but a trace of surprise flashed in her eyes. I didn't expect that this place could make my cultivation method closer to the next level. Qin Chuyu couldn't help lowering her head and pondering. Only the sound of the green lotus sword accompanied her. Maybe it's because of the weird environment here, which is very suitable to be a touchstone for the cultivation method of Huan Jin Dao, then. She already had a plan. I'll comprehend the cultivation method of the sect and master's green lotus sword classics in this place. As the saying goes, one sword can break 10,000 strands. Since she couldn't find a way to get out of this weird space, why not wait until the 3-foot-long sword in her hand was sharp enough? She was a cultivator and also a seeker of Taoism. In fact, she could cultivate anywhere. Every day was cultivation. The mortal world was good, and so was the dangerous place. The white fairy closed her eyes again, gradually forgetting everything around her. A pair of eyes were on the ground, indifferently looking at the octahedron floating in the air. A girl in a silver robe. After a while, a voice came from behind. It was the voice of a maid in the imperial palace. Lady Lyoga, Professor Jean Kailuan is here. The maid looked at the girl in the silver robe in front of her respectfully and said, "Got it. Send him directly to Tianqian courtyard." Lyoga twirled her hair and ordered indifferently, "Tell Kim Kailuan that his daily teaching time is only in the morning. Before he leaves today, have him submit a teaching assignment to me." "I understand, Lady Lyoga," the maid hurriedly replied. "What's the reaction of those 2 foreign guests?" Lu Gu suddenly asked. The maid replied, "He didn't have any special reaction, nor did he make any special requests. He only said that he didn't need any servant." "You really didn't ask for anything?" The young girl, Lu Gu, frowned. The maid thought for a moment and said, "I did ask about some fresh ingredient. Other than that, there's nothing else." "Really?" This time, the young girl, Lyoga, even turned around and looked straight at the maid. The maid panicked, but she still insisted. "All right, go do what you need to do." The girl, Lu Gu, shook her head. "Remember, whatever the 2 foreign guests said and did, remember it all. Don't leave anything out. If they ask about His Majesty, just say that His Majesty is busy these few days and will summon them again when the time is right." "Understood. Go." The maid left, and Lu Gu stayed here alone. This was the royal courtyard where Qin Chuyu was arranged to stay by Louis XXXIX. She directly lay on the grass like this. As if she was tired, the young girl slowly fell asleep. "One day I'll let this green spread all over the streets of Undersea City and let the fragrance of flowers fill the air. How's that?" She suddenly opened her eyes and sat up abruptly. Looking around, she lowered her head and murmured, "Louis, the identity of the Prince of Undersea City and the first successor wasn't made public. Even the servants and maids in Tianqian courtyard didn't know about it, but everything here was built according to the specifications of His Majesty's residence. The servants and maids who worked here naturally didn't dare to neglect it. Of course, the number of guards here could be said to be the second most in the imperial palace. Therefore, even when the student who needed to be taught appeared in front of him, Professor Kim Kailuan still didn't know about Riaz's identity as a prince. "Then, Riaz, this is Konghai, my personal assistant." Professor Kim Kailuan adjusted his glasses and said slowly, "He'll finish your studies with me." Sitting in the wheelchair, Riaz nodded silently. He actually didn't want to accept such a course, but in the end, he still came. This was the suggestion from that mysterious big brother. Boss Luo said that there was nothing wrong with learning more things. Maybe in the future it could be used coincidentally at a critical moment. In fact, Riaz thought that there weren't so many coincidences in the world. But in the end, he still came. Not only him, but Boss Luo and Miss Maid were also present at this moment as auditing students. Professor Kim Kailuan was a bit surprised but didn't object. This old man had white hair, looked weak, and spoke very slowly. Riaz couldn't arouse any interest in him from the beginning. I specialize in the history of the underwater city, as well as some research on the group structure of the sirens. Professor Kim Kailuan said slowly, since this lecture was arranged by Lady Lyoga, then I'll mainly teach you these two courses. Let's start with the historical changes of the underwater city. Okay. Riaz responded weakly. Professor Kim Kailuan didn't care about Riaz's perfunctory attitude at this time. So, Riaz, how much do you know about the history of the underwater city? If possible, please briefly explain the birth of the underwater city. Riaz continued weakly. In the Lemurian era, a terrible disaster came. All the people of the Lemurian civilization suffered from a strange disease. There was a special ray in the sunlight that would cause the body cells of the Lemurians to collapse, resulting in death. In the situation of the strange disease, because the Lemurians didn't react in time, the death rate was as high as 90%. In order to effectively avoid this harmful ray in the sunlight, the Lemurians had to launch the Underwater City project. It took them nearly 100 years to build the prototype of the underwater city. After that, the remaining Lemurians moved into the underwater city to preserve it. Professor Kinkelan nodded. So, do you know what caused the Lemurians to suffer such a terrible calamity? Riaz said, the textbooks didn't mention it. How would I know? Professor Kim Kailuan smiled and said, of course, the textbooks didn't mention this kind of thing. But you can learn from me. How is it? Are you a little interested in this course now? Riaz thought about it seriously and then said solemnly, well said, but I still choose. Flying tutor maintenance and modification, do you have it here? Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but frown. Flying tutor maintenance and modification? No matter how much you study this kind of course, you'll only become a technician in the kingdom at most. I'm not saying that technicians aren't good, but the reality is that the kingdom has a lot of technicians. You're not one of them. Don't you know how many technicians have to go into other professions because of the problem of job saturation? If it weren't for the citizens' allowance in the underwater city, how many technicians would have to stay at home and receive gifts from their parents to survive? Riaz was determined to become a master of flying tutor maintenance and modification. At this moment, the soul of flying tutor was burning in his heart. Are you looking down on technicians like us? That's not what I meant. Professor Kim Kailuan shook his head. Without technicians, magical technology won't flourish. I'm just saying that there are too many of them. However, in the underwater city, there has been a shortage of people who are engaged in other fields of study and research. For example, do you think that studying history is useless? Apart from arguing with others, what else can it be used for? Riaz shook his head. Professor Kim Kailuan said with slight anger, studying history isn't just about learning from books, and it's not just about arguing with others. You have to know that learning history is more important than using historical knowledge to equip the mind. It's not about the accumulation of basic knowledge, but the application of historical knowledge, including some ideas and practices of our ancestors. You have to get rid of the dross and absorb the essence. Once you understand history, you'll be able to see the path of the future from history. You can develop your own advanced ideas. When the time comes, you'll be able to take up a high position in the kingdom's government. You can provide His Majesty with decision-making, and even be on guard against the Emperor. You can even create more changes that are beneficial to the underwater city from the system. You can stay behind the scenes and devise strategies. Isn't this better than the boring life of a technician who goes to work at 9 in the morning and leaves at 9 in the evening? Do you know that even with the development of magical technology today, we still can't eliminate the difficult problem of hair loss? Riaz turned his head and looked bitterly at Boss Luo and Miss Maid, who were sitting obediently at the table behind him. His expression was written all over his face. I want to skip class. However, Boss Luo gave him a kind smile. Riaz sighed. All right, Professor. Please tell me the cause of this disaster. Professor Kinkelin took a sip of the tea Kong Hai handed him and calmed his breath before slowly saying, according to records, the disaster was caused by the excessive use of magical technology. Research has shown that during the process of using magical energy, the Lemurians' internal genes will be altered. This change is due to the Lemurians gradually evolving supernatural abilities outside of technology. In the Lemurian civilization before the underwater city, the Lemurians could even produce magical energy without the use of magical cores. However, it was this change that ultimately destroyed the Lemurians' right to live on the surface. Therefore, the real cause of this disaster is the development of magical technology. Can't I wear a protective suit? Riaz asked with a frown. Professor Kinkelin shook his head. The protective suit can only protect you for a while. Can you promise that you'll wear it all the time and never take it off? Something like a large shield. Riaz thought for a moment and said, our technology should be able to do that. Look, the underwater city's army has a specialized magical shield, right? It's used to block the attacks of the sirens. After the disaster, the tectonic plates of the earth began to shift. Now, magical ores can only be mined in the deep sea. Professor Kinkelin shook his head. If we still live on the surface, once the supply of magical ores is cut off, then won't the people inside the shield be waiting for death? Riaz opened his mouth but could not think of a rebuttal. May I ask, who would cut off the supply of magical ores? The question was raised by Boss Luo. Of course, Luochio followed the principle of asking questions in class and raised his hand. Professor Kinkelin looked at him in surprise and said calmly, the sirens. Why would the sirens do this? Boss Luo asked curiously again. The sirens should be a member of the underwater city. Logically speaking, they shouldn't have done this in the beginning. Could it be that the sirens won't die from the fatal rays in the sun? We'll talk about this when the other course starts. Professor Kinkelin waved his hand. Let's not talk about this topic today. Also, you have too many questions. As auditing students, be more self-aware. Boss Luo smiled slightly and just nodded. Professor Kinkelin directly threw a book to Riaz. This is the textbook I wrote myself. Today, I'll tell you about the life of the first emperor of the underwater city, Louis I. Listen carefully. I'll check your homework tomorrow. Riaz pursed his lips and opened the textbook. While listening to the professor's saliva flying in front of the classroom, he began to draw a stickman comic page by page in the lower right corner of the book. The morning passed quietly just like that. In the afternoon, Professor Kinkelin left the palace with his assistant Kong Hai. Then came the afternoon class. This time, Boss Luo and Miss Maid were rejected, because the person who taught Riaz in the afternoon was Miss Lyoga. What can you teach me? Royal bloodline, the use of blue blood power. Miss Lyoga directly threw a sword to Riaz. Today, I'll teach you how to kill people. Riaz suddenly widened his eyes. Somewhere in the deep sea, a submarine that was not much smaller than the original Nautilus slowly sailed into a huge trench in the deep sea. Soon after, the submarine launched a small exploration ship and slowly sailed into the trench. After passing through a long and dark cave, the exploration ship finally arrived at its destination. It emerged from the water. This place was hidden in the rock layers of the seabed. There was a space with land. The moment the cabin door of the exploration ship opened, the current emperor of Underwater City, Louis XXXIX, slowly walked out. At this moment, His Majesty stepped onto the land and walked forward. The road ahead was dark, but with every step he took, there was a large amount of breathing sounds around him, as well as the appearance of numerous scarlet eyes. They seemed to be some kind of creatures. They came to Louis XXXIX like hunters who were about to share their prey. Some even put their claws on Louis XX's body. He seemed to have gotten used to this kind of situation. Even though many things had already shot out their tongues and licked his body, he still remained indifferent. Finally, he slowly walked to a long staircase. At this moment, a huge force suddenly hit Louis XX's body. It whipped him fiercely and directly left a horrible wound on his back. It was a long whip-like black tongue. In the darkness, a sharp voice slowly sounded. "Louis, you don't know the rules again. Climb up, you lowly slave." The Emperor slowly exhaled and quietly knelt on the ground. He climbed up the stairs. Hashtag, 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 hashtag. Chapter 1690. Every day, the guards dispatched by the royal palace would escort Professor Kim Kailuan from his home to the royal palace. Then, they would teach Riaz his studies. This was the 4th day after the official lecture. I have to say, although this child has no interest in learning, he is quite intelligent. Professor Kim stroked his beard as he sat in the carriage of the royal flying tuo. Kong Hai was reading a biography. It was about a great sage of the Lemurian civilization before the age of the underwater city. It was said that Professor Kim Kailuan spent most of his life researching and sorting out information before writing it. The name of this great sage was Leeds. At this moment, the book flipped to a new page. Kong Hai suddenly said, "It's already the 4th day. Are you still not going to tell the lady you locked up that your student is her child? You think I should tell Kaya now?" Professor Kim looked out the window. "That's your problem." Kong Hai flipped another page of the book. "Telling her now won't help." Professor Kim shook his head. "Apart from making her more agitated, it won't do us any good. There is a feeling that cannot be understood with common sense. It's called maternal love. A parent's love for their child is enough to make the weak become extremely strong and crazier than anyone else." The pages of the book were about to flip open, but it stopped at Kong Hai's thumb. His index finger subconsciously clasped it, and together with his thumb, he gently rubbed this slightly rough paper. Although the underwater city's magical technology was quite advanced, it was not omnipotent. It could not replace all materials. The materials to make paper were quite scarce in the underwater city. Paternal love, maternal love. What is the love between family members? He looked at Professor Kim with a thirst for knowledge. "You won't understand." Professor Kim Kailuan smiled and said, "But those who do will naturally understand." Kong Hai was stupefied. He then raised the biography written by Professor Kim and pointed at a line of word. "There's a typo here." "Nonsense. How could I make a typo?" "You did." "Nonsense. I don't make a typo. If there is, it must be a problem with the input method." The flying serpent slowly entered through the side door of the Imperial Palace and soon arrived at Tianjin Courtyard. Professor Kim Kailuan walked out of the carriage with a flushed face and an indignant look on his face. Kong Hai calmly followed Professor Kim Kailuan. They walked in the corridor. The palace guards led the way in front and watched from behind. At this time, the professor suddenly said in a low voice, "Later, I will ask to take Riaz to the royal library. Look carefully and note it down." Kong Hai shifted his gaze and then nodded imperceptibly. But when they arrived at Tianjin Courtyard, they heard a noise coming from the courtyard. It was Riaz's voice. "No. I just won't train. Today, I'll accompany this old geezer Kim Kailuan for a day. If you don't eat and starve to death here, I, Riaz, don't want to spar with you." Professor Kim Kailuan and Kong Hai walked in and saw Riaz sitting on the ground. His body was still wrapped in gauze. In the past few days, Riaz's injuries didn't heal because of his super-growth physique. Instead, they got worse day by day. Well, he was beaten up in another class every afternoon. Professor Kim Kailuan and Kong Hai looked at each other. The professor frowned and walked in. At this time, the girl, Lu Gu, was standing a few meters away from Riaz. She wore clothes that were convenient for exercising. As for the corridor under the eaves, Boss Luo and Miss Maid were playing a board game that was popular in the underwater city. Master Lu Gu, what happened? Professor Kim Kailuan quickly asked. Nothing. The girl casually glanced at the professor and then looked at the young man, Kong Hai, behind the professor, and said indifferently, I just feel that the progress is a bit slow with only afternoon classes. So, from now on, I plan to join the morning classes. This. Professor Kim Kailuan hesitated. Looking at the girl, Lu Gu, who didn't seem to want to leave, he didn't know what to do for a moment. In this palace, in the royal government, there was almost no fierce person who dared to refute this girl. Although Lu Gu didn't hold an official position in the royal government, all the officials knew that this girl was equivalent to His Majesty the Emperor's shadow. Professor Kim Kailuan is here. Boss Luo put down the chess piece in his hand and smiled. Looks like it's time for class. I'm also looking forward to the professor's class today. Is it starting now? This. Professor Kim Kailuan opened his mouth and seemed to be in a dilemma. I'm leaving. I'll come back in the afternoon. Lu Gu said expressionlessly. Wait, Master Lu Gu, today I want to take Riaz to the Royal Library to look at a few unique books, is that okay? Professor Kim Kailuan quickly asked. Up to you. Lu Gu said indifferently, you can decide for yourself when it comes to learning. You'll know where you can and can't go in the royal palace. After saying that, the girl turned around and left. Professor Kim Kailuan then looked at the student who had been listening in for a few days with gratitude. In the past few days, except for the first time when he was scolded by Kim Kailuan, this auditing student didn't ask any more questions, but he still listened carefully in every class. Maybe he's really a knowledgeable guy, so I'll treat him a little better today. I just don't know who these two auditing students are, even the Kingdom Silver Moon, which has scruples about them. We're going to the Royal Library today? At this time, Riaz had already walked up to Professor Kim Kailuan energetically. In other words, we don't have to stay in this courtyard today? Why, you don't want to? Professor Kim Kailuan smiled. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Riaz said excitedly. I'm going to die of boredom in this place. The Royal Library must have many books about the modification of a serpent. I'm already hungry and thirsty. At the same time, the girl, Lyoga, who was returning to her residence, suddenly stopped. The communicator she always wore on her ear suddenly rang. The girl immediately turned around and jumped onto a building in the royal palace at an extremely fast speed. Then, she shuttled across the royal palace and arrived at the White Tower in a short while. She didn't go through the door at the bottom of the White Tower. Instead, she jumped all the way up along the outer wall of the White Tower. After a while, she had already reached the top of the White Tower and walked in through the open passage on the first floor. This was a spacious platform. At this time, a small exploration ship was anchored there. There was a side door at the side, which was unlocked and let in light. The girl, Lyoga, quickly walked over and pushed the door open. She saw Louis XXXIX changing his clothes in this room. He had already changed and was now putting on his coat. I'm back. His Majesty showed a gentle smile at this time. I said, I'll be back. The girl didn't say anything. She just walked directly to Louis XXXIX, raised her head and looked into his eyes. His Majesty said helplessly, I've already sped up all the way. It's already very fast. The girl still didn't say anything. She just suddenly flipped open His Majesty's coat and pulled off his underwear. Why do you have to do this? Louis XXXIX shook his head. Next time. I'll go. The girl lowered her head and said in a low voice. She stretched out her trembling hand but didn't dare to touch Louis's body. At this time, there were more than 100 shocking and bloody wounds on his body. There was even an even more horrifying wound on Louis's waist. It looked like he was bitten off by some kind of wild beast. She knew that if it was like this in front, it must be the same behind Louis's back, or perhaps, it was even more serious. It's not a big deal. His Majesty calmly put on his clothes. You know my body. I'll get better soon. Don't stay here. Walk with me and eat something. The girl silently followed behind His Majesty. At this time, Louis XXXIX seemed to have thought of something. He took out an object from his clothes. It was a glowing bead. I saw it on the way. I know you like it, so I brought it back. There's no such thing in the deep sea, the girl said in a low voice. Louis XXXIX smiled. By the way, how's Riaz these days? Have you gotten used to living here? Girl Yoga shook her head. I don't like him. His Majesty said, It's only been a few days. Some things can't be rushed. Time and, as long as I'm here, there will always be time. Give him some patience. I've asked Kim Kailuan to teach him cultural lessons, the girl suddenly said. His Majesty thought for a while and said, It's quite suitable. In the underwater city, he's the best in history. Since he's the best, that's enough. There's one more thing. Girl Yoga said again. The person we secretly sent out to operate on the surface through the Black Order sent back a message. Now, the Black Order is in the hands of a woman called Lamia's. And we've already contacted her. Lyoga frowned and said, But the other party's attitude is ambiguous for the time being. She didn't take the initiative to contact us. In addition, the human world on the surface seems to be going through a huge change at this time. Extraordinary powers have appeared one after another in every country. The rulers of the big countries among the humans seem to be holding a joint summit to discuss countermeasures to deal with the extraordinary society. If the humans on the surface have really started to enter the extraordinary society, maybe we can wait a little longer. His Majesty was silent for a moment and said, Wait a little longer. After eating, I'll go check on Riaz's class. Today, Kim Kailuan brought him to the library. His Majesty smiled and said, Speaking of which, I haven't been to the library for a long time. It's a good time to take a walk. Let's eat later. The girl grabbed Louis's hand and said softly, The smell of blood on you is too strong. Let me help you deal with it. If you want to be the emperor, you have to pay attention to your image. You're so thoughtful. His Majesty smiled. After pressing a button, he closed the door of the lounge. Britain, Fog City. In the White Palace, Her Majesty the Queen, who was old but still energetic, was reading newspapers and drinking tea in the courtyard. At the side, Lancelot stood ramrod straight, his gaze unwavering as he looked straight ahead. This report is quite interesting. Her Majesty the Queen suddenly took off her glasses. It says that a child was born with strange magic power. As long as a man and a woman hold the child's hands at the same time, they will fall in love with each other. Guess what happened after that? Lancelot didn't move her head and just looked over. Her Majesty the Queen pursed her lips and said with a smile, The town where the child lives has been very popular recently. It's almost to the point where the demand can't meet the demand. Your Majesty, you should take your medicine, Lancelot said expressionlessly. Then, he took out a box of pills that had been separated into different sizes. Oh, I hate these strawberry-flavored things, Her Majesty the Queen said with a bitter face. Won't they consider my taste and make them banana-flavored? Lancelot just pretended not to hear the complaint. She just took out the pills meticulously and then urged the Queen, who was unwilling to take the medicine, to take the pills. At this time, a figure came over quickly. Mr. Gareth, the current head of the night organization, who wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses but had serious eye bags, quickly walked to Her Majesty the Queen's side and handed her a document. Your Majesty the Queen, Mr. Gareth said quickly, the location of the conference has been decided. It's in Hua Nation. Her Majesty the Queen was a little curious. I remember that the entire Western non-human world seems to have a tacit rule that they don't step into this country easily. This time is different. Mr. Gareth shook his head and said, This time, Hua Nation took the initiative to propose. Moreover, I have already read the information about the place where the conference will be held. If it is as Hua Nation said, then it will be a very safe place. Since it's decided, then go. Her Majesty the Queen put the document on the table without even looking at it. I'm old. I can't walk much and my health is not good. Gareth, you go in my place. Mr. Gareth nodded silently and glanced at Her Majesty the Queen. Why are you wearing this tennis jersey today when you're old? What? Kelowna Shinryu, who was working hard on a difficult level dungeon, looked up at a man in a black suit in front of him. Say that again? The man had no choice but to brace himself and say, Master Long, a summit meeting between the big countries is going to be held here soon. The Bureau hopes that you will be able to attend when the time comes and hold the fort. What does a meeting between the major countries have to do with me? Long Shirua's mouse was moving in a Z-shape at this time. And are your heads caught in the door? Why do you have to come to this broken place of all places? The man in black smiled bitterly and said, Lord Long, it's not like you don't know that magic is forbidden here. Moreover, it doesn't distinguish between friend and foe. All extraordinary powers are useless here. Tell me, in this world, other than here, is there any other place that is safer than here? I'm not going. Long Shirua snorted coldly and moved the mouse again. Then she said loudly, Pianxian, close the door and see the guest out. Chapter 1691. The true dragon of the divine land had already asked the guests to leave. Now that this one had spoken, even the unparalleled state scholar of the Bureau, the fire-cloud evil god, could not withstand it. He was just a junior agent from the agency stationed in this area, so he could only leave helplessly. The little butterfly monster sent him to the pet hospital and apologized. I'm sorry, Sister Long has been staying up late these days, so she has a bad temper. Please don't mind. Saying this, the little butterfly quickly bowed to him. What a nice little girl, Wei Zidao praised her in his heart. No wonder those monsters in the city kept praising this little nurse in the pet hospital. This kind of smile could heal people. Wei Zidao thought that if it weren't for the fact that both monsters and monsters had different paths, he would probably become her fan. Today, Monday, was really a full day. It doesn't matter. Wei Zidao smiled. I heard that Lord Long has always been like this, so I was prepared before coming. Your name is Dance? What a nice name. Thank you. The little butterfly monster smiled sweetly. Boss gave me this name, and I like it very much. Lord Long? Wei Zidao was stunned. No. The little butterfly monster shook her head. Boss is boss, and Sister Long is Sister Long. Then, who is boss? Wei Zidao's heart skipped a beat. This was the result of his intuition. People who had done too many things in secret would instinctively be more careful. Well, the little butterfly monster pressed her lower lip with her finger, slightly raising her head. Boss is a very good person. Everyone likes Boss very much. Everyone? Luo Dance counted with her fingers. Me? Sister Zijuan and Sister Long. Zijuan. Was it Su Zijuan? The legendary last princess of Xianyuan royal family? Wei Zidao was shocked. He felt that he had accidentally heard a big secret from the little nurse, which was enough to shock the whole Kelowna. The last princess of Xianyuan royal family was shocking enough. Even Lord Long was involved in this? Wei Zidao's breath quickened. He was about to ask about the boss's identity. But at this moment, the window upstairs suddenly opened, and Long Shirua popped her head out. Dance? There are no more snacks at home, go buy some. Hey, why are you still here? I don't give free food. I'm leaving. Wei Zidao broke out in a cold sweat and hurriedly left. Master Long, did he hear the conversation just now? So, he deliberately warned him? Maybe he said, with your identity, you are not qualified to know that kind of thing. In that case, what was the identity of this mysterious boss? Why did the last princess of the Xianyuan royal family and the true dragon of the godly land like him? Big news, absolutely big news. Big news that could make both the divine land and the demon realms explode. With a trace of impatience, Wei Zidao quickly called for a taxi. He didn't want to take the bus, and he even planned to pay for the taxi himself. He didn't want to be reimbursed. Hey, Brother Liu, it's me, Zidao. I just came out from Lord Long's place. Wei Zidao quickly took out his phone. Brother Liu, listen to me, I heard a big news. What's wrong with this guy? In front of the window, the true dragon of the divine land still did not retreat. He just looked at the guy who moved stiffly but walked very fast. He frowned and said, speaking of which, what's his name again? I forgot to ask. The butterfly monster said regretfully. Shinryu of Kelowna threw a bottle of happy water and stared at her. Go to the supermarket. Sister Long, you can't litter. Go, go, go. Long Shirua stretched out her hands and made a grabbing gesture. The butterfly monster immediately ran away. Oh, I see, that's it. Lu Mingho quickly hung up the phone with Wei Zidao, but in his heart, he didn't pay much attention to the subordinate's report just now. As the person in charge of the ability to do things, Lu Mingho's qualifications in the administration were far from what Wei Zidao, who had just debuted for 1 or 2 years, could compare with. The princess of the Xianyuan royal family and the Shinryu of Kelowna were both taken in by a man. How could it be possible? Not to mention the terrifying strength of these two, how could there be a man who could subdue these two at the same time? Even if there was such a man, Su Zijuan and Long Shirua would bite each other whenever they met, and these two were willing to imitate a Huang and vying. Did they think this was a fantasy novel? That so-called boss was probably the end of a good ship. Well, wind from an empty cave was not without reason. Lu Mingho thought for a while and made a phone call. Hello, I'm Lu Mingho, agent number 1984. Well, I hope to check some information. Yes. Male, age unknown, race unknown, occupation unknown. Suspected codename Boss. Temporarily limit the scope to extraordinaire or monster clan. Well, I'll wait for your news. Lu Mingho just hung up the phone, but another call came in directly. He glanced at it, and his expression suddenly became much more serious. The caller was Section Chief Yen from the headquarters of the administration in the capital, the last student of the peerless fire cloud evil god. No matter who it was, he couldn't neglect them. Section Chief Yen, what can I do for you? Well, I'll personally supervise. Yes, the first batch of people arrived yesterday. Well, I'll go there later. The call didn't last long, and Lu Mingho quickly put on his coat and went out, not waiting for Wei Zidao's return. This period of time was probably the busiest and most stressful period in Lu Mingho's career. God knew why the summit of the major countries was held in this city. But this was the idea of the higher-ups, and he, as a lower middle-level personnel, wasn't qualified to know the real reason behind it. But I didn't expect the meeting to be held at the Peace Grand Hotel. Lu Mingho got in the car and muttered, that old toad really knows how to do business. Damn it, because of this guy, the house prices here are rising. His salary couldn't catch up with the rising house prices. He couldn't live anymore. He was an agent of the administration, but at the same time, he was also someone's husband and father. He was no different from ordinary workers, and he was very concerned about some trivial things. Countdown to the Kelowna Summit. 10 days. Underwater City, Imperial Palace, Library. All the precious documents since the Sunken Sea era were collected here. Most of them were the only copies, and there was even a lot of information about the Lemurian civilization from the previous era. But most of them were about the humanities, geography, and some miscellaneous articles of the Lemurian civilization. The more important precious information about the Lemurian civilization had always been kept by the emperor himself. But there was another layer in this library, a mysterious hidden layer that only the Emperor had the authority to open. Professor Kim Kailuan thought silently. At this time, he was standing in front of a bookshelf, and he took out a book from it, and then came in front of Riaz. Riaz began to doze off again. It wasn't that he was bored to sleep in Professor Kim Kailuan's class, but he had consumed a lot of energy in the past few days. That young girl, Lu Gu, really did not show any mercy when she trained him. It was like this physically, but it was even more terrifying mentally. She said that the blue blood power of the imperial family could only be improved when one was in an extreme state. This is the history of the flying tumbler technology during the Lemurian period. Professor Kim Kailuan put the book in front of Riaz and smiled. Seeing that you have done a good job in the past few days, today we will focus on the history of the flying tumbler. Take a look at this book first and write down the parts that you don't understand. I will explain it to you later. I have to go over there to find some information. Riaz's eyes suddenly lit up. This unique book obviously directly touched his excitement. Riaz quickly took it and looked at the table of contents carefully. The more he looked, the more excited he became. However, he didn't know that Professor Kim Kailuan had quietly left at this time. The Royal Library was very large. It had a circular structure and 5 floors. Each floor was full of bookshelves like a sea of books. It was easy for people to hide here and disappear. Professor Kim Kailuan didn't teach at first, so Boss Luo and Miss Maid, who were auditing students, seemed to have to walk around. Soon, Boss Luo took out a book about the stars from the bookshelf. This was the work of an astronomer during the Lemurian civilization. Does the starry sky above our heads have a boundary? Or is it just like the continent we live in, a supermassive space that we can't see the end of even with our current technology? Or is it just the body of a strange creature that doesn't exist in the same dimension as us? These were the words written on the title page of this book. Boss Luo could see that this book was emitting a faint light at this time. Not only the light of the soul, but also those objects that were stained with the light of the soul in the long days were also the same. The more inheritance and the more things were condensed, the stronger the light would be. They were actually another kind of carrier that not only carried knowledge, but also wisdom, prayers, and even will. These were actually things that could be used as trading items. We can't conquer the stars, even the deep sea today. In the silence, a soft voice came. It didn't disturb Boss Luo and Miss Maid here, but it attracted their attention. The person who walked slowly was His Majesty, who had disappeared for a few days. Beside him, the girl in the silver robe was following closely. "We meet again, Your Majesty." Boss Luo was used to greeting first. "We'll meet again in the future." Louis XXXIX smiled. He walked to the front of Luochio and reached out to take the book from Boss Luo's hand. He casually flipped a few pages and said while reading, "This book is not bad. I once read it for a few days and learned a lot." Boss Luo smiled and said, "Your Majesty likes to read?" Louis XXXIX said, "I've read all the books here, more than once." Riaz is below. Boss Luo looked at the huge desk below and said, "Don't worry." Louis XXXIX returned the book to Luochio and said casually, "I'll go find him later. Before that, follow me to a place, how about it?" Luochio said, "Your Majesty, are you planning to show me this library?" His Majesty smiled mysteriously and said, "Another library." With that, His Majesty walked in another direction. Boss Luo handed the book about the starry sky to Miss Maid and followed him. Miss Maid looked at Miss Lyoga and said, "Can we borrow this book to read?" "Up to you." Miss Maid said expressionlessly. "Thank you." Miss Maid smiled gracefully and caught up with her master. Miss Lyoga didn't follow. Instead, she looked in the direction of the library thoughtfully and muttered, "There are so many mice today." In a flash, she disappeared into the dense but orderly sea of bookshelves. Soon, under the guidance of His Majesty, Boss Luo and Miss Maid came in front of a relief sculpture. The relief sculpture on the wall seemed to depict a terrible war. The warrior was probably the image of the human in the Lemurian civilization. As for the opponent, it was a mass of dark shadow that covered the sky. His Majesty didn't say anything about this relief sculpture. He just walked in front of the wall and pressed his hand on it. In an instant, the entire wall disappeared and turned into a pure white light wall. There may be danger in here. Do you plan to go in? His Majesty suddenly said. Boss Luo didn't say anything and just walked up. Louis XXXIX said, I thought merchants would be more cautious. That means I'm not a qualified merchant. Luochio gave such an answer. Louis XXXIX was a little surprised, but he shook his head and said, If you're not a qualified merchant, why would you insist on those conditions? It's too harsh. But I also hope I can be a qualified merchant. Boss Luo said jokingly. Go in. There's no danger inside. His Majesty shook his head and said, You go in first. Then, Boss Luo didn't hesitate at all and stepped into the light wall. Miss Maid was next, but she looked at His Majesty with a faint smile. Your Majesty, fortunately you met my master in this era. Her back figure also disappeared into the light wall. Louis XXXIX couldn't help but frown. Fortunately in this era? Would it be different in other eras? His Majesty shook his head. These two guests from the underwater city were too mysterious. Of course, they could also be pretending to be mysterious. Louis XXXIX didn't dwell on this for too long. Seeing that the two of them had walked into the light wall, he quickly walked in. After that, the light wall returned to its original appearance. It was still the relief sculpture that depicted the war. At this moment, a figure looked around and walked over slowly. It was the young man beside Professor Jean Kailuan, Kong Hai. He seemed to be looking for something. After seeing the relief sculpture on the wall, he stopped. He looked at this relief sculpture and frowned. After a long time, he whispered to himself, There's no siren tribe. After a long while, Kong Hai slowly retreated and walked to another place, as if he was looking for something. Not far away, behind a row of bookshelves, the girl's figure flashed and then disappeared. Hashtag 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 PS. As usual. Chapter 1692. On the second floor, Kong Hai bumped into Professor Kim Kailuan. At this time, Professor Kim Kailuan was holding several thick books in his hands. Perhaps it was as he said, he was looking for some information. Kong Hai walked over, but shook his head slightly. Professor Kim Kailuan's expression didn't change much, but he suddenly said, Oh, Lord Lyoga, you're here too. Kong Hai's pupils contracted for a moment, but they quickly returned to normal. He calmly turned around and saw that behind him. He didn't know that the kingdom's silver moon which had quietly followed him. At this time, Lyoga put on a smiling face. Professor, shouldn't you be teaching Riaz? Why did you leave him alone in front of the desk on the first floor? Professor Kim Kailuan waved the books in his hands and pushed up his glasses. I'm looking for some information for teaching purposes. I can't help it, the information available to the public is limited. What information do you want? Just make a list. Lyoga said indifferently. I'll have someone send it to you. Of course, this is just for teaching Riaz, understand? Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but show a puzzled expression, then he put on a cautious expression and asked tentatively, Lord Lyoga, to be honest, I'm really curious about Riaz's identity. Not only is he living in Tianqian Courtyard, but he's also being taught by you. Lyoga looked at Professor Kim Kailuan with a faint smile. Didn't I tell you? Oh, it seems I forgot. After the professor and Kong Hai both showed a surprised expression, the young girl Riel smiled and said, Riaz is now the first successor of Undersea City. His Majesty the Emperor has already conferred him as the Prince of Undersea City. What? Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't hide the shock in his heart and shouted, Riaz is Underwater City's prince. The first successor. Lyoga made a shushing gesture. Professor, the library must be quiet. As a scholar, you should know better than me. So, be quiet, okay? The girl turned and left. Professor Jean Kailuan and Kong Hai exchanged glances. Kong Hai's gaze quickly calmed down, but the professor's heart was still unable to calm down. What is Louis XXXIX planning? Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but mutter. Then I'll keep looking, Kong Hai said as he continued to walk into the dense forest of bookshelves. This is the real Royal Library. His Majesty's voice rang out slowly. The outside can only be considered as a public reading area at most. There was only one floor, but it was still a ring-shaped structure. The difference was that there were no rows of bookshelves here, only pieces of 2-meter-tall transparent rectangular crystal. Boss Luo walked towards a large square crystal closest to him. Just as he approached it, lines of words appeared on the surface of the crystal. There seemed to be some medical records, and they were records of the human body's genes. Medicine, communications, agriculture, and even military. His Majesty opened his hands slightly, with a serious expression on his face. All the true knowledge of the Lemurian civilization in various fields are recorded here. At the same time, the results of some major breakthroughs in the underwater city are also recorded here. Without a doubt, having these is equivalent to having a civilization. I won't deny this at all, Your Majesty. Boss Luo praised. This is really a place full of surprises. If the book about astronomy in Miss Maid's arms was just like a firefly's light, then this library was like the sun, releasing a bright light. The inheritance of civilization. This was the fire seed of civilization, condensing the time and life of countless people, and even the crystallization of their will. It was not comparable to a single outstanding soul's light. The crystal in front of you records medical knowledge. His Majesty smiled and said, My friend who unfortunately passed away, Charles, once gave me the treatment of some diseases of human civilization. With the medical technology of this crystal, all the diseases in the human world can be effectively and quickly treated. Do you know the value of this? Boss Luo nodded. I even saw the technology of prolonging life. If this kind of knowledge is spread out, the value is immeasurable. Over there is communication. His Majesty pointed. It can even achieve telepathy. Of course, there are many conditions. As for here, it is agriculture. Do you know, the underwater city is only so big, but there is only one place for planting. But we can supply the needs of the entire underwater city, and there will never be a shortage. We can even replicate many extinct species, and here there are various advanced weapon designs. Your Majesty, what do you want to say? Boss Luo asked calmly. His Majesty stepped forward and said seriously, You can choose the technology you like here, or even all of it. This is the essence of a civilization. Even the foundation of the Lemurian civilization, the magic technology is here. But here, there is no technology to make the holy armor. Boss Luo shook his head. That's right. Among the conditions I gave, there is a technology requirement. But now in the underwater city, Your Majesty, you can only give me the White Tower or the technology to make the holy armor. This is the underwater city, or even the foundation of the Lemurian civilization. His Majesty sighed. I hope you don't go too far. If possible, Boss Luo suddenly said softly, I also hope that I can give it to you unconditionally. If possible? Louis XXXIX couldn't help but frown. I can't now. Boss Luo shook his head. Since I was curious about what you could give me and started to estimate, I can't. I won't stop unless Your Majesty gives it up. Louis XXXIX couldn't help but frown. He vaguely felt the existence of some condition, but he didn't have more information to speculate what the condition was. His Majesty was silent. Boss Luo didn't continue to look around, and neither did Miss Maid. Even with her memory, she could remember everything after seeing it once. This was the rule. Things like knowledge were considered to be obtained once they were recorded. Unlike other items, they could be returned after identification. If, His Majesty suddenly asked, I say if all the fire of civilization here, can it be used to offset one of your conditions, thereby reducing the demand for that condition? Your Majesty, which condition do you intend to use to offset? Boss Luo didn't answer but asked instead. The fourth one, His Majesty said suddenly. Which one? Boss Luo asked again. Offset. His Majesty was about to speak. Boss Luo suddenly said, I hope Your Majesty can consider clearly, behind this offset, what is to be given up and what is to be kept. We really hope that when the guests make each decision, they won't regret it in the future. Louis XXXIX opened his mouth several times. Fine sweat faintly seeped out of his forehead. After a long time, he slowly exhaled and said rather tiredly, Since you don't plan to continue the tour, then leave. Okay. Luoqiu nodded and immediately said, Take it as a return gift for that ice cream. A suggestion. In my opinion, technology is something created by people, and only by people. His Majesty shook his head and said indifferently, Please. When they returned to the first floor of the Royal Library, Boss Luo saw Professor Kim Kailuan sitting beside Riaz, seemingly discussing something. Your Majesty. The professor heard the footsteps and saw that it was Louis XXXIX who came in person. He couldn't help but be slightly surprised. He quickly stood up. But why did these two auditing students come back with His Majesty? Had they met before? Professor, we haven't seen each other in a while. His Majesty indicated that there was no need to be reserved. Later on, I want to find some time to ask you some questions. I dare not. Professor Kim quickly said, It's my honor to answer your questions, Your Majesty. Louis XXXIX smiled and said, It's good that you can really answer my questions. This smile made Professor Kim Kailuan's throat move subconsciously. Sit down, don't stand. His Majesty said seemingly casually, I just came to see the progress of the teaching. Riaz, how do you feel these days? Tell me about it. Very bad. Riaz shook his head. Do you think my current appearance can be considered good? He shook his arm. The gauze on it. In fact, at this moment, almost only half of Riaz's face was exposed. Lyoga is just a bit strict. His Majesty smiled and said, Otherwise, I probably won't see you when I come back this time. Riaz suddenly felt a chill on his back and didn't dare to speak. He actually wanted to be naughty, but he realized that under the gaze of His Majesty, he couldn't be naughty at all. Since the appearance of Louis XXXIX, Riaz's heartbeat had been inexplicably fast. Compared to the Emperor, Riaz felt like a child. Seeing that Riaz was silent, His Majesty waved his hand and said, All right, now that I've seen it, I should go back. There are still many documents waiting for me. Riaz, learn well from Professor Kim Kailuan. He is the best scholar in our underwater city. You will learn a lot from him. Riaz nodded silently. Then, see you later. His Majesty looked at Boss Luo and said, See you later, Your Majesty. Wait! Riaz suddenly stopped the Emperor at this moment. He pressed his hands on the table and stood up. There is one thing, speak. Riaz plucked up his courage and said, Your Majesty, I haven't been home for a few days. I want to go home. My mother still doesn't know about my news. I'm afraid she will be worried about me. I thought you didn't want to make this request. His Majesty smiled and said, Don't worry. I've already asked someone to find your mother. What? Riaz was startled and immediately became overjoyed. Really? Professor Kim Kailuan suddenly opened his eyes and his heart skipped a beat. Come with me and you will know. His Majesty smiled and immediately said, How about this? This morning's class will end here temporarily. Professor, what do you think? Of course, Your Majesty. Professor Kim Kailuan hurriedly lowered his head, but his eyes couldn't hide the trace of panic. Your Majesty, can I go with you? I want to gradually get to know Riaz's mother. I hope to know more about this child. It will be helpful for my future teaching mission. A teacher wants to see a student's home. This is a good reason. His Majesty nodded and said, "Then come with me." Just as they were about to leave the library door, Kong Hai appeared. He took a few books and slowly walked to the end. He came to Professor Kim Kailuan's side and said in a low voice, "I didn't find. Where are we going? Is the Emperor back?" "You'll know when we get there." Professor Kim Kailuan shook his head. "From now on, don't speak. Record everything in your heart." At this time, in front of them, Riaz walked to the Emperor's side. He raised his head and asked, "Your Majesty, how did you find my mother?" His Majesty smiled and said, "Your mother serves in the army. I am the Emperor of Undersea City. Can't I find a soldier loyal to Undersea City?" "That's true." Riaz nodded subconsciously. He felt that this question seemed a little redundant. Louis XXXIX suddenly said, "But if it was another person, it might not be so easy to find. Do you know why?" "Why?" Riaz asked curiously. "Because only I have such authority." His Majesty narrowed his eyes and said, "The authority of an emperor. You will have such authority in the future." "Me?" Riaz was dumbfounded. Professor Kim Kailuan was drenched in cold sweat as he listened. If the Silver Moon Witch's words were enough to make him shudder in fear, then when Louis XXXIX said something similar, it really set off a huge wave in his heart. Was Riaz really going to become the next Emperor of Undersea City? "Yes, it's you." His Majesty patted Riaz's shoulder, "But after I die." Professor Kim Kailuan felt dizzy again. Finally, in Tianchun Courtyard, Riaz saw a female soldier in military uniform. She had a worried look on her face, but she was sitting upright. "Mother!" Riaz cried out in surprise at the door, then he quickly rushed to the woman's side. "Riaz! It's really you! The people from the palace came to find me. They said you." This seemed to be a very touching reunion. However, Professor Kim Kailuan's heart sank. If Kaiya was here, didn't that mean Destiny's base had already been established? When did this happen? Before he left this morning, he had even contacted the stronghold. How could this be? Hashtag. Chapter 1693. In the courtyard, Riaz reunited with his mother and told her everything that had happened recently. Riaz had many questions in his heart. He did not dare to tell others, but since it was his mother, he did not have to worry. "Mother, what is the truth about father? Did father really treat me well back then?" Riaz finally asked his mother. Kaya had been listening calmly the entire time. Only now did she reach out and stroke Riaz's face. "Mother will find a way to find out the truth. Riaz, before that, you just need to protect yourself." "But I've now become the Prince of Underwater City for no reason." Riaz stood up excitedly. Kaya looked at him and signaled for him to calm down. She pressed her hands on Riaz's shoulders and said softly, "Riaz, do you still remember what I said when I left you a message last time?" Riaz nodded and subconsciously said, "You said it was inconvenient for you to answer phone calls in the camp. You said you would find a way to deal with father." Kaya shook her head. "I told you to take good care of yourself." "Mother?" Kaya said seriously, "Listen, Riaz. Only if you can take good care of yourself can I be at ease. Since the Emperor wants you to be the successor, then you should use this identity well. Learn whatever he wants you to learn, be it knowledge or skills. Don't lose interest in these things just because they're boring. Sooner or later, you'll be able to use them." That big brother said something similar, Riaz subconsciously said. "Are you talking about the two who live here with you?" Kaya asked thoughtfully. Riaz nodded. At this moment, Kaya sucked in a deep breath and said, "All right, Riaz. His Majesty has allowed me to see you. You know that I'm a soldier of the underwater city. I can't leave my post as I please. This is the responsibility of an adult." "I understand." Riaz nodded heavily. "Remember what I said," Kaya hugged Riaz in the end. You just need to take good care of yourself. Only then can I be at ease. Mother. At this moment, Riaz suddenly said, Say, can I request His Majesty to let you meet with my father? I feel like His Majesty might agree. I've already met your father. Kaya did not look into Riaz's eyes. But he can't come to see you now, and you don't ask about your father. Why is that? He has more important things to do at the moment. Kaya said slowly. During this time, he can't be distracted. Riaz, don't you trust me? Riaz could only shake his head, but he had doubts in his heart. But in the end, he chose to believe it and buried his doubts. Remember what I said just now. Remember to take good care of yourself. Learn whatever the people in the palace teach you. Kaya exhorted. You have to imagine yourself as a sponge, absorbing as much water as possible. Okay. Riaz nodded, then asked, Mother, when can I see you again? I will come and find you. The reunion between mother and son did not last very long. Very soon, Kaya and Riaz left the room where they met alone and appeared in front of the hall in the courtyard. The Emperor and Boss Luo were leisurely enjoying the black tea that the maid had brewed. Of course, Professor Kim Kailuan and the young Kong Hai also had a share, but the professor seemed to be rather absent-minded. The girl Rikugo was not here either. Ever since they left the library, she had not been seen. Your Majesty. Kaya led Riaz out and bowed in front of Louis XXXIX first. Riaz could only imitate his mother. Come to think of it, this was the first time he had used such formal etiquette to face the Emperor of Underwater City. I hope this meeting can put you at ease, the Emperor smiled. Madam Kaya, if you want, you can come and visit Riaz at any time. Thank you, Your Majesty, Kaya said calmly. But I'm a soldier of the Underwater City. I can't just leave my post. I'm truly happy that the army has such a responsible soldier like you, Madam Kaya. The Emperor smiled. Afterwards, he pointed at Professor Kim Kailuan to the side and said, This is one of the most renowned scholars in Underwater City. He has also been Riaz's teacher recently. Madam Kaya, the professor wishes to have a simple chat with you. Professor Kim Kailuan immediately looked at Kaya. There's no need, Kaya said indifferently. I've heard of Professor Kim Kailuan's name. It's Riaz's fortune to be able to receive a lecture from you. As his mother, I have nothing to say. I'll leave Riaz to you, Professor. He's naughty and mischievous, but he's not a bad person. Professor Kim Kailuan nodded without batting an eyelid. Don't worry, Madam Kaya. I will do my best. Then, Your Majesty, please allow me to return to camp. Kaya performed a military salute in front of the Emperor now. Go. The Emperor waved his hand with a smile. Professor Kim Kailuan suddenly said at this moment, Your Majesty, Madam Rikugo will be teaching in the afternoon. I'll return first and prepare for tomorrow's lecture. Please go ahead, Professor, the Emperor agreed. Before long, the hall became slightly emptier. However, Riaz seemed to be in much better spirits after seeing his mother. I'll have lunch here. The Emperor smiled. It'll be livelier with more people. The servant girl did not say anything. She only nodded and left her seat, walking towards the kitchen. Over the past few days, the servant girl had been in charge of the meals in Tianshan courtyard. The servants of the palace had nothing to do. Taking advantage of this, Riaz went to Louis XXXIX. He gritted his teeth and said, Your Majesty, I agree to that woman's morning exercise. The Emperor did not mind at all. You can talk to her about this yourself. Do you not even have the courage to become a qualified emperor? All right. Riaz was helpless. He thought about it and said, But as for the matter of being the successor, I hope I can think about it. I hope you can think it through, Your Majesty. I've been thinking about it since you were born. The Emperor smiled. Since I allowed you to come here, I've naturally thought it through. Don't mention this matter again. Riaz opened his mouth and looked helpless. He could only make an excuse. I'm a little tired. I'm going upstairs to rest. I won't be eating lunch, but I'll be back for the afternoon class. The Emperor did not mind this and allowed Riaz to go upstairs. Only then did he look at Boss Luo and say, "There should be some time before lunch. Do you want to play a game of chess with me? I saw a chessboard outside the corridor." Boss Luo agreed. When he rearranged the chessboard, the Emperor suddenly asked, "By the way, when did this Titan civilization appear? Before us? In another era?" "That's not a useful answer." The Emperor shook his head but did not pursue the matter. Now that the chessboard was set, the Emperor made the first move without asking any questions. Only when they were about to leave the palace did Professor Kim Kailuan quickly catch up with Kaya. "Madam Kaya, please wait," Professor Kim Kailuan called out softly. "Madam, how did you come to the palace?" "Of course it's because of His Majesty's summons," Madam Kaya said expressionlessly. "Professor, is there anything else?" A hint of doubt flashed through Professor Kim Kailuan's eyes before he shook his head. Kaya directly boarded the serpent provided by the palace. She did not stop at all. Looking at the serpent that was gradually disappearing, Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but frown even more. What exactly happened? The young Kong Hai went up and asked softly. "We'll talk about it when we get back." On the way back, Professor Kim Kailuan calmly returned to his residence. The guards who had escorted him back to the palace had already left. After the professor entered the door, as usual, he went to the garden to water, read for a while, and then took a nap. It was almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon before he woke up and continued to work in the study. After having dinner with Kong Hai, he and Kong Hai took a walk on the street as usual. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the professor and Kong Hai met with a friend at a tea house to discuss academic issues. They returned home at 11 at night and took a bath. Just as they were about to return to their room, the professor bumped into Kong Hai in the corridor and whispered to him. "The stronghold has been destroyed by the military. I wonder how many of them escape. Kaya should be the real one. She's not a random impersonator. She didn't say anything to you. Perhaps she's being watched as well," the professor said quickly. "You don't have to go to the palace with me tomorrow. Go take a look. Be careful." Kong Hai nodded. Afterwards, he took out a folded piece of paper. "The route. I drew it in the past few days." Professor Kim Kailuan returned to his room and did not sleep for the entire night. The next morning, Professor Kim Kailuan dressed up early and boarded the serpent that had come to pick him up. He entered Tianchen Courtyard. What surprised the professor was that Riaz was unusually serious in class today. His intuition made him feel like he was a different person. "Why didn't I see Mr. Kong Hai today?" Boss Luo asked curiously during the break. "Oh, I asked him to find me some information, so he didn't come today," the professor replied casually. Boss Luo asked, "Professor, do you know a scholar named Leeds in the Lemurian era?" Professor Kim Kailuan was startled. Of course he knew about Leeds. He had a job on hand to compile the biographies of this famous scholar from the Lemurian civilization named Leeds. "How do you know about Leeds?" Boss Luo smiled and said, "Yesterday, when I was in the library, I saw one of his works on astronomy. I found it interesting, so I wanted to know more about it." Professor Kim Kailuan thought for a moment and said, "Leeds, a thinker and astronomer of the Lemurian era. He was also one of the last 7 great sages of the Lemurian civilization before the age of the underwater city. What do you want to know?" "It's in this book." Boss Luo raised the book that Miss Maid borrowed from the library yesterday, turned to a page, and said slowly, "It mentioned a place called the Land of Reincarnation, the End of Death. I wonder if the classroom knows about this Land of Reincarnation?" Professor Kim Kailuan took the book and quickly glanced at the front and back pages. Then he fell into deep thought. After a while, he said, "According to my research over the years, after this book was published at that time, it caused a great sensation. Especially the matter of the Land of Death. It even attracted the attention of the government at that time. They also sent people to investigate. Is there a conclusion? This book doesn't have much explanation. The professor shook his head and said, "No, I can't find any information about that exploration. The collection in the Royal Library is the essence of the previous era. It's really valuable knowledge. Since there is no record of this so-called land of reincarnation, the government at that time obviously didn't think it was important. Why are you interested in this matter?" Boss Luo smiled slightly and said, "I just think it's interesting." "Interesting?" Boss Luo said. "If life can be reincarnated, what do you want to do, Professor?" Professor Kim Kailuan instantly opened his mouth and wanted to say something. But when the words came to his mouth, he realized that he didn't seem to have thought about what he wanted to do. "I've never thought about this problem." Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but shake his head. Besides, if life can really be reincarnated, the Lemurian civilization may not have gone to the point of extinction. It must have prohibited the erosion of the Lemurians' bodies before the start of the magic era. Naturally, there wouldn't be the underwater city now, and you and I wouldn't be here discussing this problem, right? Indeed. Boss Luo nodded, then put away the book. The recess just ended. At this time, Riaz came back with a pile of books. Professor Kim Kailuan glanced at them and found that most of these books were books about the structure of the human body, the foundation of movement and fighting technique. "Why are you looking at these books?" Riaz said unhappily. "Of course it's to give Lyoga a good beating." "Oh, this child seems to have another layer of gauze wrapped around her today." Professor Kim Kailuan shook his head and directly put away the miscellaneous books. Then he looked at Boss Luo and said, "In the library, there are many books about the great sage Leeds. If you are interested, go look for them. But don't expect too much." This great sage did indeed have many irreplaceable contributions to the Lemurian civilization, but in his later years, most of his theories were basically unfounded and pure fantasy. Since it's fantasy, why do you still want to study the deeds of this great sage? I said that fantasy only happened in the later years of the great sage Leeds. In the first half of his life, he still had many contributions and even the deeds of influencing the decisions of the government at that time. Of course, it's worth studying. Professor Kim Kailuan said unhappily, "Besides, we are in the field of history. How can we deny all of a person's achievements just because of his mistakes in history? If you ask this, aren't you afraid that the road will be too narrow?" "That's true." Boss Luo smiled casually. Professor Kim Kailuan suddenly frowned, took out a book from the books he brought, and threw it in front of Boss Luo. "Young man, you have to be down to earth. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Learn more about the basics. Read this general history of Undersea City first, then think about the Lemurian era." The maid next to him suddenly picked up a pen at this time and wrote something in a small notebook, probably thinking like this: if one day this professor also became a customer, then this small notebook would be useful. Maybe. Hashtag 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 PS. As usual. Chapter 1694. The Holy City. The Holy Church, the residence of the Pope. Paladin Wasco was walking quickly in the corridor. His expression was unfriendly. He had brought Father Stella and the 4 Paladin trainees back. It had been a few days since they came back, and they were walking through the passage of the inhuman domain. The situation was much more serious than Wasco had imagined. 5 descended angels had all fallen in this battle, and the Paladin battalion was on the verge of being crippled. As for the clergy, even if they were to gather all of them from all over the world, it would be a problem for them to gather even half of their combat power. This would be the weakest and most difficult period of the Holy Church's existence. The only thing that could be considered fortunate was that this matter was temporarily hidden. But it was unknown how long it could be hidden. At this moment, a nun with messy clothes suddenly burst out of a room in the corridor. Wasco was stunned as he saw the nun holding her collar. Her face was slightly red, and her eyes were filled with tears. When she saw Wasco, she lowered her head and ran away without bothering to salute. "Oh, Wasco, you're early." Then, a blond youth walked out while buttoning the buttons on his shirt sleeve. His face was radiant. It was Father Stella. "Bastard Stella, you." The paladin's forehead could not help but swell, and his eyes were spitting fire. You actually dared to violate the palace. I'll kill you. I shouldn't have promised the Pope to bring you back." "TSK," Father Stella said with disdain. "Trash Wasco, I've been away for so long, and you haven't even exploited the resources here. What a waste." The paladin immediately rushed forward and rolled up his sleeves, looking like he was about to attack. But at this moment, a priest in black hurried over. "Great Lord Wasco, Lord Stella, you're both here. The Pope sent me to find you." "I'll deal with you later," Wasco said through gritted teeth. Father Stella could only mutter, "I didn't do anything to your granddaughter. Besides, I'm just giving a body massage to a young and cute girl. Don't you know that it's good for blood circulation?" Somewhere in the Pope's palace, a huge explosion could be heard. A corridor had been directly blown apart. A moment later, Paladin Wasco and Father Stella arrived at the Pope's study. The elderly Pope's legs were even covered with a blanket. He adjusted his spectacles and couldn't help but frown as he looked at the two of them. "What happened to the two of you?" Paladin Wasco's eyes were completely black. As for Father Stella's right sleeve, it was torn apart. "Pope, I think you should reconsider your decision to appoint Stella as the Pope candidate," Paladin Wasco said expressionlessly. Father Stella nodded in agreement. "I agree with Wasco's suggestion." Wasco and the Pope could not help but stare blankly. Father Stella continued, "I think you, old thief, should abdicate now and give me the Pope's throne directly." "Heresy! Heresy!" Paladin Wasco was about to draw his sword. Father Stella reached into his pants and scratched. "Shut up, trash. All right, stop fooling around." The Pope could not help but pinch his forehead. "I called you here today because I have something important to tell you. Stella, I hope you can make a trip to the summit meeting." "I just came back," the Pope said casually. "I'm planning to reopen the case in a few days. I want to retrial all the prisoners in the Godly Might prison." "How can there be so many unjust cases?" the Pope said impatiently. "I've already sent people to intercept those prisoners. What if those felons escape midway? Since you're back, do your job properly. I'll give you a satisfactory answer about the Amunst matter later. There are still so many pure nuns in the Holy Palace waiting for me to preach." Father Stella shook his head. The Pope said expressionlessly, "Apart from you, there's another leader this time. She's Sister Lavinia, one of the most outstanding women in the Holy Church. She's 25 years old this year. Blonde hair, 173 centimeters tall. You can measure her 3 measurements yourself. Are you going or not?" Father Stella wiped his hands on his hair and added holy light special effect. After revealing his shiny teeth, he smiled casually. "Isn't it just a meeting to see who has the bigger fist? Don't worry, I'll let my fist convince the others. I hope you'll do as you say." The Pope didn't care. "This meeting will be held in Hua Nation. Do as you see fit. I'm also looking forward to you using your fist to convince them. TSK, it seems like I'm going to become all-mouthy king this time." The priest shook his head. "My fist, unfortunately, doesn't hit women." The Pope waved his hand and didn't intend to say anything else. Stella's mouth was cheap, everyone knew that. After the Pope waved Father Stella and Wasco away, he sighed. At this moment, a bright light suddenly fell into the Holy Palace. The huge and holy aura instantly made the hearts of all the knights and clergymen in the Holy Church's headquarters. Even the Pope couldn't help but skip a beat. A white figure floated in front of the Pope. Are you the current Pope of the Holy Church?" The white figure gradually became clear. Feathers that emitted a faint white light fell to the ground. What the Pope saw was, shockingly, an incomparably handsome man dressed in white with a long black robe draped over his shoulders, an angel. "My name is Uriel." Holy flame! The Pope didn't care about his frail body at this moment. He hurriedly walked out and knelt in front of the angel. He could more or less guess the reason for this angel's arrival. "You must keep the matter of my arrival a secret." "Yes, just declare that I'm an ordinary angel." "Trash Wasco, what are you daydreaming about?" Outside, Father Stella frowned as he looked at the guy he'd known for almost his whole life. "I said, help me find out about Sister Lavinia, did you hear me? Are you really an idiot or are you pretending to be crazy?" Wasco said with slight anger. "Can't you feel it? This holy aura, disappeared?" With that, Wasco looked at the Pope's study with a solemn expression. Father Stella followed Wasco's gaze in confusion. Well, he didn't see anything. "Don't change the topic." He couldn't help but put his hand on Wasco's shoulder and frowned. "I seriously suspect that this so-called Sister Lavinia has become your pawn. That's why you didn't tell me. Tell me the truth. We've been friends for so many years. How can I not be shameless enough to take advantage of my friend's wife?" Paladin Wasco shook his head. It seemed that he could only go back and avoid Stella, then ask the Pope about the situation. But that holy aura, was it the appearance of a new angel? "You want to know about Sister Lavinia?" Wasco suddenly asked. "Isn't this nonsense?" The priest said seriously at this time. "I recently watched a very magical Oriental movie. There was a woman called the Holy Maiden of God's Dragon Sect. After she was drugged with a secret aphrodisiac, the male protagonist took advantage of her. Since then, the male protagonist directly exploded with force. I was wondering if this secret drug could be developed." Even Paladin Wasco, who had been accustomed to Stella's moral integrity, could not help but be shocked by this man's bottom line. He shook his head and said, "Don't have such a rotten idea. Lavinia has made a lifelong vow. Don't hurt her, or I won't let you go." Lifelong vow? When Father Stella heard this, he suddenly shook his head like a frosted eggplant and said, "It's boring." Wasco could not help but look at Stella in surprise. "It's amazing. I thought you would say this is more interesting." Father Stella said very seriously, "I used to think so. Until 50 years ago, when I slept with a nun who may have made a lifelong vow, I felt that I was quite naive. Think about it, when you are doing things, the woman under you has been shouting the name of the Lord. I feel like I am in a live broadcast, and another guy is peeping at me all the time. This feeling of eating shit, how can I feel good?" "Heresy, you are really a heresy." The paladin suddenly pulled out his sword. "Go to the duel arena. Don't say any more. Come on. Today I will beat the shit out of you." The priest directly rolled up his sleeves. Several clergymen next to him bowed their heads, and after a glance, they continued to walk. "These two people are here again. Their relationship is so good." Something like that. On the ground, on the other side of the ocean. In a manor in the United States. The servants were busy in the manor. The mistress of the manor was wiping a silver pistol in the courtyard at this time. Even if the servants passed by, they did not dare to make a sound, for fear of disturbing the woman who had just become the owner of the manor. Kacha, kacha. After disassembling the pistol, the mistress of the manor used a terrifying speed to reassemble the pistol. She raised the pistol, aimed at a certain place, and then directly pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet shot out, and the trunk of a big tree in the courtyard instantly shook. After that, a figure fell from the shaking. The bullet directly pierced through the forehead. Dead. After the figure fell, the servants immediately came and took the corpse away. These servants were used to this kind of thing. Even today, similar things had happened twice. These were the internal members of the organization, those who did not accept the rule of the mistress of the manor, and then secretly sent out assassins. Just as the servants were dragging the corpse out, another woman came into the courtyard. The servants quickly bowed their heads. Katerina! The woman waved her hand to let the servants leave quickly. Then she walked to the mistress of the manor and sat down. Lamias, I'll change the place for you. This is Charles's former residence. You'll be an obvious target if you stay here. Isn't this good? The mistress of the manor. Lamias smiled casually at this time. As long as I am here, the rats will take the initiative to come out. If I change to a secret place, they won't be able to find the way. Katerina shook her head. It was very strange. She did not expect that after Lamias returned, she would be so strong. She even had such terrifying power that she could directly suppress the current Black Order. Although the power of the Black Order was almost gone, what's the matter? Katerina thought for a while and said, The location of the meeting in Kelowna has been decided. What does this have to do with us? Lamias shrugged and said, That is a meeting between the major countries. The Black Order has never participated in these things. Katerina looked dignified and said, Today, 2 foreign agents who claim to be the Kelowna administration found me and sent this thing, an invitation letter. Kelowna administration? Lamias suddenly frowned. How did they find us? Katerina said with a wry smile, It's not how they found us, but from the beginning they knew where we were. The Holy Church has been tracking the whereabouts of the Order for many years, but they have never found it, right? Lamias frowned and said, What do you mean by this? Katerina said, You used to be a member of the action team, so you don't know much about these things. It seems that it's time for me to teach you about the real giants of the supernatural forces hidden behind the scenes in this world. Well, I'm listening. Lamias nodded, but she suddenly waved her arm again. She pointed her pistol, and a gunshot sounded. On the roof in the distance, another figure fell down. Only then did she put the pistol on the table, stretched, and said, Go ahead, it's fine now. The supernatural forces in the current world, except for the underwater city that only we know about, are actually divided into 3 different regions. Katerina said slowly, Kelowna in the east, Eurasia in the west, and North and South America on our side, basically maintain a state of mutual non-interference. But there is one rule that North and South America and Eurasia abides by, and that is to never step into the territory of Kelowna. In fact, if it weren't for the invitation letter sent by the Kelowna administration this time, most of them Inhumans, in North and South America and Eurasia probably wouldn't have the chance to step into this eastern country in their lives. Lamias couldn't help but be shocked. She did have a lot of things that she didn't know. Although she had lived for a very long time, she was basically trapped in one place for 99% of the time. The things that she knew were really pitiful. We will make her the Shinryu of the East, Katerina said seriously. She is the only one in the world who is recognized as an absolutely invincible existence that cannot be resisted. ######### PS. 3780 seconds. Chapter 1695. Among the clouds and mist, red-crowned cranes flew in unison, and 7-colored deer wandered in the mountains and forests. It looked like a legendary fairyland. Xianyuan Palace, in the meeting hall, the princess of the royal family was listening intently to the argument between the descendants of the Xianyuan family from the Qian and Kuan tribes and the demons that had been incorporated. The argument was endless. It had been almost 2 hours. Yes, the Xianyuan Palace was still using the ancient method of calculating time. Seeing that Chichikamaya, the leader of the Kuan tribe, who had always been kind and amiable, was rolling up his sleeves as if he was going to fight if he didn't agree, the princess, sitting in the seat of honor, couldn't help but think of the hooligans in the human parliament. Seeing that it was about time, the princess suddenly stood up, lifted the cup, and threw it out. That was really a powerful and resonating voice. Everyone was shocked. However, the princess didn't say anything and just snorted coldly. Then, she waved her sleeves and left, scaring the leaders of the Qian and Kuan tribes into silence. Mr. Turtle, what do you think the princess meant by this? Should we go to the administration's invitation or not? Whether we're willing or not, we still have to attend this invitation. The filthy old turtle stroked his beard and said, "This matter involves the transcendence of the secular world. Since ancient times, the Xianyuan Palace has been the guardian of Kelowna. How can we show weakness in front of the transcendence of other countries? Then, why did the princess throw the cup just now? Isn't it because of the matter between you and me? My kid from the Kuan tribe just had a fight with your kid from the Chien tribe in the school. It's normal for kids to fight. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." "Bah! Old man. My kid from the Chien tribe was beaten so badly that he almost became autistic and didn't eat or drink for 3 days. How can you say that this is a small matter? Tisk, do you think that my kid from the Kuan tribe isn't injured? A piece of his nail was flipped off. Look at how serious his injury is." "Old man, Chichi Kamaya, how can you bully me like this? Come on, if you're not convinced, then let's fight." Oh right, the big shots of the two departments of Chien and Kuan were indeed quarreling in the conference hall because of the children's fight. This is the daily routine of the court meeting in Xianyuan Palace. As for the invitation from the administration of Divine Land, I'll just accept it. If I don't like it, I'll do it. The moment Her Royal Highness returned to her bedroom, she waved away the maids who were serving her. Then, she took off the heavy phoenix robe and sat up in frustration. She stretched out her hand and took off a bead on her body. Then, her face suddenly changed. "Jessica, this is still the Xianyuan Palace. You'd better not casually take the bead that big sister gave you." Suddenly, a shadow sneaked out of the room and stood in front of Jessica. "You can't let others know that you're a fake." Looking at the ghost baby in front of her, Jessica shook her head with a bitter smile. "I finally understand why Master doesn't want to stay in this place." The ghost baby didn't say anything. He didn't want to stay here either, even though it was very quiet here. Jessica shook her head again. "I'm going out this time, won't I be exposed?" The ghost baby said indifferently, "This time, you'll definitely be followed by the Ministry of Chien and Kuan. You don't have to go out and nobody dares to spy on you." "I hope so." Jessica sighed and put the bead back on. Instantly, she appeared in the appearance of Susie Juan again. Underwater City. It had been almost a week since the preliminary round of the Fitu competition ended. There were still 3 weeks before the final round of the Fitu competition. That was to say, Riaz had already lived in the palace for 6 days. Apparently, he wasn't a genius. Professor Kim Kailuan even revised his teaching plan and slowed down the pace of teaching, although in his opinion, Riaz was indeed very hard-working. Well, there were indeed such people who could barely keep up with others after putting in several times more effort than others. However, once they relaxed, they would be left far behind. Professor Kim Kailuan called such hard-working students academic flunkies. Another teaching mission ended. Professor Kim Kailuan was packing up and preparing to leave the palace. These days, he couldn't find a chance to stay in the palace after the teaching mission ended. He needed to find something. For this, Kong Hai had already drawn the route map of the palace. There were many reasons why he agreed to Lu Ji's teaching mission, and this was one of them. "Professor, why don't you stay in the afternoon?" After class, Riaz rushed to Professor Kim Kailuan excitedly. "I don't have to teach that woman this afternoon." "Oh." Professor Kim Kailuan's heart moved, but he said calmly, "What's the matter?" Riaz said excitedly, "His Majesty wants to practice Fidu in the afternoon, so he asked me to accompany him. Therefore, he stopped teaching that violent woman." "His Majesty wants to compete with you in Fidu?" Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but frown. He didn't know what the Emperor was up to this time. After meeting Madame Kaya in the palace that day, he hadn't stopped looking for information about the stronghold. He sent Kong Hai to investigate, and when Kong Hai returned, he confirmed that the stronghold had indeed been completely destroyed. This made Professor Kim Kailuan's heart tremble. He didn't know if the royal government had already discovered his true identity. However, he had never used Kim Kailuan's identity to participate in Destiny's activities. Master Kim Kailuan's appearance was different from Professor Kim Kailuan's. There were no survivors. The only fortunate thing was that there weren't many people left in the stronghold at the time. However, I don't think Destiny can withstand many more attacks like this. He didn't see Kaiya's corpse. This was what Kong Hai said after he returned from his investigation. Professor Kim Kailuan was basically certain that the Madame Kaiya he saw in Tianchen courtyard that day was the real Kaiya, and not an impostor. However, she didn't acknowledge him. Professor Kim Kailuan guessed that it was because she was under the Emperor's surveillance. The Emperor had probably brought Madame Kaiya here to force her. Perhaps it was to calm Riaz down. Looking at Riaz's completely different attitude towards learning before and after, Professor Kim Kailuan already had some guesses. Could it be that Louis XXXIX was really planning to raise Riaz as his successor? This was a rather crazy idea. The Emperor of Underwater City had always been the successor of the royal bloodline. There had never been a case of choosing a commoner in history. Even though this matter hadn't been announced to the public yet, and even the guards and servants in the palace didn't know Riaz's true identity. However, the Silver Moon Witch didn't care about revealing this matter in front of him. This made Professor Kim Kailuan feel very confused. He didn't think that his identity as an outstanding scholar in Underwater City was worth the Silver Moon Witch revealing this matter. It was a pity that after that day, he had no way of contacting Madame Kaiya again. He rubbed his forehead. He felt that it was becoming more and more difficult to move around under the surveillance of the royal government. Professor. Riaz looked at him blankly. You don't want to go? Of course not. Professor Kim Kailuan quickly shook his head. I also like sports like the serpent competition. Since His Majesty is personally participating, of course I can't miss it. Okay. Then let's go together, Riaz said as he clapped his hands. Let's all go together. Professor Kim Kailuan subconsciously looked at the two auditing students in the classroom. Looks like they already knew about this matter. Professor Kim Kailuan secretly shook his head. In the past few days, he still couldn't figure out the identity of these two people. He couldn't beat around the bush to avoid arousing suspicion. However, he didn't know if it was an illusion or something else, but he always felt that the blonde girl in the black and white dress looked at him strangely every time. It reminded him of the customers buying meat in the market. When the customers looked at the meat on the rack and thought about which piece of meat to ask the meat stall owner to cut, it seemed to be the same look in their eyes. In short, it was a look of ill intent. However, the professor didn't know when he offended this extremely beautiful woman. He didn't know and he didn't dare to ask. The professor sighed and suddenly felt that he was alone. Now, in a Destiny, there was no one who could be entrusted with such a big responsibility. Long Gang was also imprisoned by the kingdom's government, and it was really difficult to move an inch. It's too difficult for me. The professor and Kong Hai stayed in the Tianchen courtyard for lunch. After a short rest, they followed the guards and arrived at the serpent competition track that was exclusively used by the emperor. Among all the emperors, Louis XXXIX was the one who liked the serpent competition the most. The serpent competition had always existed, and then it reached an unprecedented scale under Louis XXXIX. His Majesty directly set aside a piece of land in his own palace and directly built a track. As soon as they arrived, they saw that His Majesty was already waiting for them there. Louis XXXIX had already been waiting there for a long time, and he was wearing a black battle suit specially used for the serpent competition. The girl that Riaz was afraid of, Lu Gu, was also here, and she was wearing the same clothes as the emperor. They were standing there like a couple. Riaz didn't know why he suddenly had such a feeling in his heart, but soon his attention was attracted by something else. Asla! Riaz cried out in surprise and hurriedly ran over. At this moment, not far from the Emperor, there were several different models of a serpent. One of them was the serpent that Riaz rode that day. His Majesty the Emperor glanced at Riaz, who was rubbing his face on Asla, and smiled. "This is not your original one. I found someone to restore it. However, most of the parts on it were scattered from your original one, except for its core. Of course, the current power system is also the best." "I feel it." Riaz rode on the new serpent and looked at the parameters on the interface, his eyes shining. Although Asla White Chelan was powerful, it was so powerful that Riaz even felt a little scared. It was this kind of familiar data and operating system that he liked more from the bottom of his heart. However, these words were actually for Boss Luo and Miss Maid. The Emperor exclaimed, "What an amazing technology! My research institute has been working hard these days, but the progress of cracking it has been zero. Do you two mind if I study it for a few more days?" Luoqiu smiled and said, "Since it's something that Your Majesty wants to buy, of course, we'll let Your Majesty study it. That's generous of you." His Majesty smiled casually and pointed at the brand-new, flying tumuli that had been arranged at the side. "I wonder if the two of you are interested in playing as well?" Boss Luo was also interested in this kind of a flying serpent, which was quite cool if it was not modified inexplicably, so he gladly agreed. "There are some special clothes over there, you can choose." The Emperor pointed at a lounge at the side. Boss Luo gestured, and Miss Maid walked over. "Professor, do you want to join us?" The Emperor suddenly looked at Professor Kim Kailuan and asked. The professor hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Your Majesty, my body can't withstand the stimulation of the serpents. I'd better be a quiet spectator." "Then, this young man can join us." The Emperor casually glanced at Kong Hai beside the professor and said, "Young people should ride the serpents." Kong Hai was about to refuse, but unexpectedly, Professor Kim Kailuan agreed. "Since it's an invitation from Your Majesty, Kong Hai, you should accompany Your Majesty. This is a rare experience." Kong Hai didn't say anything and walked directly to the room to choose clothes. "Your Majesty, I won't change my clothes. Can I try it now?" Riaz said excitedly. The Emperor smiled mysteriously and said, "Don't worry, today's track isn't here." Riaz froze and subconsciously looked at the track in the Emperor's back garden. It was already spacious and huge, right? "Today's track is outside." As the Emperor spoke, he clapped his hands. A gap suddenly opened in the weather system above the underwater city, and a huge black shadow stopped outside the underwater city. Louis XXXIX said with a smile, "Today, we're going out of the city. Our destination is the Sonam Trench." Riaz blinked. Obviously, he didn't know where this trench was. Professor Kim Kailuan's expression changed slightly, and he exclaimed. He knew the location of this trench. It was the intersection point closest to the Siren clan in the underwater city. It used to be a mine in the underwater city, but it was abandoned after the mine was exhausted. However, nowadays, the Siren clan would often appear there. In the undersea city, there was a dangerous position that specialized in scavenging. The people of the undersea city who were engaged in scavenging would often appear in some relatively dangerous places in the deep sea or abandoned places to look for missing materials. In the Sonam Trench, the Siren clan would occasionally attack the scavengers. "Your Majesty, you can't do this." Professor Kim Kailuan quickly stepped forward. "Don't worry." The Emperor smiled and said, "In the morning, the 3rd Legion of the underwater city set off. Now I think it should be cleaned up." Professor Kim Kailuan couldn't help but frown. His expression changed slightly, and he almost scolded the Emperor. This Emperor actually used the 3rd Legion of the underwater city to play the flying serpent game. It was simply a waste of money and manpower. "Come, let's board the ship first." "They're back." The Emperor walked straight to the small transport ship, the Flying Serpent, as he spoke. At this time, Miss Maid came back with 2 suits for the Flying Serpent game. Riaz glanced at it. It was the same white suit. This doesn't seem to be a warship of the underwater city? The professor suddenly said. The Emperor turned around and smiled. Well, this guy is called Sapphire. I picked it up outside some time ago. There are many technologies of the humans on the surface. If you're interested, you can study it. What? The humans on the surface have the technology to explore this place? Professor Kim Kailuan's expression changed drastically. The Emperor said indifferently, We're all humans. Why can't the humans on the surface develop their own technology? Professor, do you think we, the descendants of the Lemurian civilization, are nobler than anyone else? Your Majesty! Professor Kim Kailuan's expression changed again. If these words came out of the mouth of a commoner, it would be considered treason. The Emperor didn't care. Standing on the transport ship, he waved his hand and said loudly, Board the ship. Chapter 1696. Professor Kim Kailuan said that he could freely visit the Sapphire, built by humans from the surface world, but he wasn't in the mood at all. The professor was worried about the tip of the iceberg that His Majesty the Emperor had revealed about the humans in the surface world. As for what he was worried about, he was unable to sort out his thoughts. Professor Kim Kailuan looked at the darkness of the deep sea through the submarine's window. He felt that destiny was just like the darkness outside, full of misfortune. Perhaps even he himself did not know that he was probably the kind of person who would worry about everything blindly. Of course, there was no such story in the history of Undersea City. On the way, Professor Kim Kailuan had been locked in the lounge provided by the Emperor. He did not see anyone, but his organization, Kong Hai, was wandering around a Sapphire with great interest. Then, Kong Hai met Boss Luo in a corridor. Because they met once a week recently, they were familiar with each other. Although this young man did not like to talk, he came with Professor Kim Kailuan every time, so naturally, he could not be ignored. When they met, Kong Hai was standing in front of a metal wall in the corridor. His palm was pressed on the wall and his eyes were closed. Is there anything different here? Luoqiu asked curiously. By the way, Miss Maid had already changed into the white, flying serpent suit. Kong Hai, on the other hand, chose a dark blue outfit. I can feel the existence of some magic energy. Kong Hai's fingers slowly slid along the metal wall. The flow of magic energy is based on magic energy lines. Just like flowing water, as long as there are lines, magic energy will flow and leave traces. Here there are such traces. Luoqiu glanced at Miss Maid casually. Yu Yi looked at Kong Hai and said slowly, The Emperor said that this is a submarine built by humans from the surface world. How can there be magic energy technology? Kong Hai looked at them in surprise and asked in puzzlement, Logically speaking, you should have seen through it as well. Why would you have such thoughts? This submarine is obviously built with a mixture of magical technology. I don't know about the propulsion system for now, since the propulsion room isn't open to the public. I haven't seen it before, but the fact that this submarine is able to navigate here and withstand the pressure at such depths is clearly due to the power of magical energy. Boss Luo smiled and said, Mr. Kong Hai, why do you think we know this? Kong Hai replied calmly, Naturally, it's because of the flow of air. The flow of air? This reason even surprised Miss Maid. She couldn't help but feel a little curious. What kind of flow? Kong Hai thought for a moment. I can see the flow of air. The air exists around everyone, so it will definitely flow and vibrate due to human activities. Even if it is still, there will still be actions that affect the flow of air, such as breathing. And then, Kong Hai said indifferently, the air around you has always been stagnant, which is very strange. In the underwater city, only the air around the Emperor doesn't flow. Even the air around the silver moon which actually flows, but it's very small. What does this mean? Kong Hai said matter-of-factly. This means that you are the same as the Emperor. He is the ruler of magical energy, so you should be the same. You will naturally know about the traces of magical energy on this submarine. It sounded very reasonable. But Luo Qiu suddenly understood one thing. The young man beside the professor seemed to be the type who was not sensitive, or the type who didn't care about covering up his behavior at all. We are not the same as the emperor of the underwater city. Luo Qiu shook his head. Then how did you do it? Kong Hai's eyes lit up, and his face was full of curiosity. If you are not the same, then this ability to stop the flow of air is not the only type, and can be obtained through other means? Why do you want to know this? Kong Hai thought for a moment and said, Of course, it's to study the essence of magical energy. In the underwater city, only the emperor can achieve absolute control over magical energy. This is the foundation for him to rule the underwater city. However, if it can be obtained through learning, it means that it will no longer be a privilege of the royal family. This can completely change the situation of the underwater city being ruled by the emperor alone. Mr. Kong Hai, aren't you afraid that we will tell the emperor what you said? Boss Luo smiled. You won't. Kong Hai shook his head. Why? Luo Qiu asked. Intuition. Kong Hai answered directly. Intuition tells me that you won't do that, so it doesn't matter if I tell you. Boss Luo was even more curious. So, as long as your intuition is right, anyone can tell you? Kong Hai cast a puzzled look again, and said in a well-known tone, Intuition is intuition. Whether I say it or not depends on my mood. If I'm in a good mood, I will tell others. If I'm in a bad mood, even if I feel that I can tell others, I won't take the initiative to say it. Isn't that the case? That's right. Boss Luo opened his mouth, then smiled and said, Finally, I have some new understanding of Mr. Kong Hai. Kong Hai stared at the two people in front of him seriously, shook his head and said, But I know very little about you. Will you tell me about you? Boss Luo continued to smile and said, If we don't say it, will Mr. Kong Hai be angry? Kong Hai shook his head and said, When I'm unhappy, I won't tell others anything. I'm the same. Why can't you be like this? Why should I be angry? Boss Luo's eyes lit up. Mr. Kong Hai, do you usually get along with the professor like this? Kong Hai nodded directly. He often says that he will lose a few years of his life because of me. However, the reality is that he has lived the longest among all the people I know. Luo Qiu smiled and said, It seems that Mr. Kong Hai and the professor have a very good relationship. Are you friends despite the difference in age? Kong Hai shook his head again. I've known Kim Kailuan for a long time. Although I look very young now, in fact, I've always looked like this all these years. I won't age. When I first met Kim Kailuan, he was only this old. With that said, Kong Hai reached out and gestured, placing his palm on his waist. Boss Luo said, I'm more curious about Mr. Kong Hai's past now. Do you plan to tell me? I don't want to talk about the past, Kong Hai said casually. Kong Hai said casually, Furthermore, I will occasionally forget some things. As time goes by, the number of things I forget will increase as well. Now that we don't have a complete picture of the past, there's no point in talking about it. Oh, we've digressed from the topic. We were actually talking about this submarine. And how did you guys stop the flow of air? Especially the method you used to stop the air from flowing. Can you teach me that? I can't teach you unconditionally. Boss Luo shook his head and said, You can pay me. How much is the payment? Kong Hai asked directly. But I don't have many contribution points. Kim Kailuan has given me some contribution points over the years, but I've basically used them to buy books and eat. I've used most of them to buy books. I still have 1329 contribution points from the underwater city. Is that enough? Underwater cities' contribution points are useless to me. Boss Luo shook his head. If Mr. Kong Hai wants to learn, you can only exchange it with something that truly belongs to you. Something that belongs to me. This question made Kong Hai fall into deep thought. He couldn't help but lower his head in silence. After a while, he shook his head and said, I don't know what belongs to me. Does this set of clothes I'm wearing count? No, this set of clothes was given by the emperor. Then, only the underwear is left. I bought the underwear myself, so it should count as mine. At the professor's house, I still have many books that should be mine, but I want to give those books to you. Boss Luo laughed softly. That was a smile that couldn't help but laugh, which was completely different from his usual gentle smile. This was even the smile that Miss Servant Girl cherished the most. What Kong Hai didn't know was that at this moment, Miss Servant Girl felt much better about him. What are you laughing at? Kong Hai asked confusedly. Boss Luo waved his hand, restrained himself, and sighed. It's nothing. It's just that after doing business for so long, it's the first time that someone wants to exchange underwear with me. It's unusual. At the beginning, didn't humans exchange clothes? Kong Hai shook his head and said, What's wrong with this? Do you want my underwear or not? However, Boss Luo turned around at this time. His shoulders trembled slightly. It turned out that he was laughing secretly. After a while, he sighed and turned back again. Boss Luo thought for a while, waved his hand, and a card the size of a poker card appeared in his palm. It wasn't a black card, but a transparent crystal card with many circuitry patterns on it. This is for you. Boss Luo said indifferently, There should be something you want on it. The crystal card flew slowly to Kong Hai until it reached his hand. Kong Hai nodded. Okay, wait for me, I'll take off my clothes and give them to you. No need. Boss Luo waved his hand. You've already given me the reward. When? Kong Hai frowned in confusion, and at this moment, he even pulled open his collar to look inside his body. I've already given you the reward. Boss Luo smiled. There aren't many things that can make me feel relaxed. Even if it looks funny, it's still a precious thing. Kong Hai shook his head. I still don't understand. It's fine if you don't understand. Boss Luo said casually. I also have a lot of things that I don't understand. After a long time, I'll naturally understand what I need to understand, so there's no need to rush. Okay. Kong Hai nodded and put away the crystal card, but he didn't even say a word of thanks. Mr. Kong Hai, please continue your tour. Boss Luo suddenly said. We'll also continue our tour. Let's just separate. Kong Hai didn't force him to stay, and he seemed to agree with this kind of separation. He walked away decisively. He even quickly turned his attention to this sapphire again. Boss Luo didn't withdraw his gaze until Kong Hai walked out of the corridor. At this time, Luoqiu suddenly looked at Miss Maid, joking. Say, if I say that I'll fulfill one wish of anyone who can make me happy, will there be a fight outside? Miss Maid blinked her eyes and also joked. In this case, Master must have owed Miss Pianxian a lot of wishes. Do you think it's worth it? Luoqiu asked faintly. Miss Maid didn't even think about the answer. As long as Master likes it, it's fine. What's wrong with that? The former boss destroyed the subworld just because he was in a bad mood. Luoqiu sighed, looking at the endless darkness outside, shaking his head. I don't know what I'll get in return for doing whatever I want. But maybe I should try more things at each stage so that I won't miss anything. I shouldn't have crossed this stage. Master, what are you going to do? Luoqiu remembered the conversation he had with the former boss in the intertwining time and space, and a clear idea gradually appeared in his mind. So, he stroked Yu Ye's face, using the most gentle tone he had ever used in his life. I don't need the identity of the boss. I'll just be myself, and then I'll go to heaven personally to get your body back, like an ordinary hot-blooded man, and I'll be angry, okay? Miss Maid's expression was calm. Her eyes were dark blue, the color of the sea above the deep sea and under the sky. Master, you forgot that handing me over to heaven was originally a deal. And to heaven, it wasn't wrong. Boss Luo couldn't help but blink, laughing. How can I be angry? You shouldn't be angry, Miss Maid said softly. What if I really need it? Boss Luo said. Are you going to stop me? Miss Maid shook her head. I'll accompany Master. Then you're saying that it's not wrong? Miss Maid's eyes began to brighten. I want to take back what originally belongs to me, and it's not wrong. So, Master, you don't have to do it. What if I have to do it? Heaven is a guest, the boss shouldn't do it. Miss Maid shook her head. I can also be a guest, and if I don't do it, I'll buy it and do it. Luochu said seriously, in the next period of time, I plan to let myself be unscrupulous 3 times, but only 3 times, and no more. And I'll find a way to keep the last time. This is the first time you've done this. Why do you choose heaven? Miss Maid asked softly. Because of you. I'm possessive now, so I want to be willful this time. I don't need any reason. Luochu raised his head, looking above the deep sea, then the sky, and then the endless space. His gaze penetrated layer by layer, and went directly to the place full of gospel. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in heaven. Chapter 1697. The angels at the highest positions were gathered in one place. This was the Archangel Hall, the place where the angels at the highest positions usually discussed. There were many seats in the Archangel Hall, but there was only one seat at the top. That seat belonged to the Archangel who led the entire angel army in heaven. There were many legends about the Archangel. In the entire system of heaven, the Archangel's status was not lower than that of the Holy Son. At this moment, in the Archangel Hall, the Archangel, who was covered in silver armor and whose face was hidden, was sitting at the top seat. Below him were Raphael and Gabriel. As for Uriel, he had already arrived. At this moment, the discussion in the Archangel Hall was about Uriel's arrival this time. Uriel's arrival is too reckless. Gabriel was the first to speak. She is in this world. Michael, you shouldn't have kept the search for Metatron a secret from us. The Archangel at the top seat didn't speak. He didn't even seem to care that Gabriel said she existed in subworld number 003. Gabriel frowned again. I know the importance of searching for Metatron, and I'm not dissatisfied with your actions this time. However, we know that subworlds within the single digits are all quite dangerous. This time, if we didn't know that Gamaliel and the other 4 angels were dead, you wouldn't have told us that you had already started the search, right? The Archangel said calmly, I'm in charge of the entire angel army, and searching for Metatron is my mission. You and I have different responsibilities. Besides, it's not that I didn't tell you, but I thought that even if I didn't say it, you should be able to guess it. Gabriel, I gave you time. But you didn't come to me, and you didn't tell me anything about subworld number 003. I was investigating the matter of the transcendent. How would I know that you would come back so quickly? Gabriel frowned. I rushed back as soon as possible. Are you blaming me? She is of great importance. I can only tell you in the Archangel Hall. How can I let my subordinates bring the news back to you? The Archangel shook his head and said calmly, Maybe you think she is special, but in my opinion, she doesn't belong to heaven anymore. There's no need to hide this matter. His father had never intended to hide this matter from him. It's just that you did it on purpose and lied to the entire kingdom of heaven. Gabriel slammed the table and was slightly angry. I can't let another Lucifer appear. Don't all of you know how it felt to become the king of hell? Who was she? If the people of the kingdom of heaven knew how she was cut off by the kingdom of heaven. Michael, are you really not afraid that the entire wings of heaven legion would betray you? That is her army, and they are only loyal to her. You are just temporarily managing them while her is not around. The Archangel said calmly, All of us here are Father's believers, brothers and sisters. There is no distinction between you and me, and there is no such thing as loyalty to anyone. Even if they know the truth, they will still be the wings of freedom of the kingdom of heaven. Their faith will be tested, and then they will be reborn in the fire and become even purer. Gabriel snorted coldly. I don't know whether they will be tested or not. The only thing I know is that they have never listened to your command. Since Her was no longer around, Wings of Heaven was nominally under your command, but all of us know that Wings of Heaven has never acted with your archangel army, and they are not stationed in the kingdom of heaven. They have always stayed in the place of origin of Her legend. If a Wings of Heaven was in the kingdom of heaven when the Transcendents invaded, how could the kingdom of heaven be destroyed by those arrogant guys? I have already said that Her is no longer a disciple of the kingdom of heaven. The archangel's voice was slightly deep. Gabriel said in a deeper voice, Her holy body is still here in the petitioner tower. The archangel suddenly said, Soon, Wings of Heaven will become even purer. Their faith will be unified once again, and they will truly become the combat power of the kingdom of heaven. Gabriel was stunned, and Raphael, who had been silent at the side, was also stunned. Gabriel couldn't help but frown and say, Michael, what do you mean by this? However, the archangel said, You're right. We shouldn't allow a second Lucifer to appear. Since both of you joined forces and hid the fact that you gave up on Her, you missed the best opportunity to be honest. Then we can only correct the mistake. What do you want to say? The archangel said slowly, Do you know why I put Her holy body in the petitioner tower and let it soak in the purest faith all the time? Raphael, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly looked over, and his expression changed slightly. Michael, you mean a new holy soul has been born in Her holy body? Hearing this, Gabriel's eyes widened instantly. The archangel said slowly, Soon. I have already put in a few sources of subworld. The new holy soul might not be as bright as the previous Her, but it is not much different. Soon, Her will appear in front of Wings of Heaven again. The two seraphs under the throne fell silent at the same time. After a long time, Raphael asked solemnly, Whose idea is this? Yours or mine? The archangel didn't intend to hide it at all. But Father knows about this, and he didn't stop me. That is enough. That is because Her holy body. What if Her knows about it? A trace of worry flashed across Gabriel's face. But since it has come to this step, Michael, I only hope that this matter will stay in the Archangel Hall at most. It doesn't matter if Her knows. The Archangel said calmly, Since Her has already belonged to that place, as long as there are enough benefits, Her won't do anything no matter what her mood is. Let's end the discussion about Her here. Now let's talk about Lucifer. Gabriel, you should have brought back Lucifer, the sinner, instead of giving him such a ridiculous punishment. Gabriel shook his head and said, The power that sealed Lucifer came from that place. If I take him away, it's hard to say that I won't destroy the operation of that place. You have become timid. The archangel said indifferently, That place is just a place used to exchange any items. It has never been a so-called force worth fearing. As long as there are enough resources, it's enough to use that place as our hired thug. What is it that makes you so afraid of that place? Is it just because the kingdom of heaven was bought from them? In the kingdom of heaven, you are probably the only one who doesn't take this matter seriously. Raphael shook his head and revealed a wry smile. I heard from Gabriel that the owner has changed to someone else. It's not the one we used to know. No matter who the owner is, the rules of that place are the same. The archangel said calmly, As long as the rules exist, the so-called owner is just a puppet under the absolute benefits. At most, he will give out more souls. What is there to be afraid of? Gabriel opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. He didn't think that Michael was arrogant. On the contrary, Michael's attitude might be correct. With enough benefits, as long as enough benefits were provided, the power of that place could be used at will. However, that power was taboo. If it was used at will, it meant that one had to obtain more resources by devouring other subworld. If one couldn't restrain this behavior, it might not be a good thing. Michael was confident that he could restrain himself? What's that sound? Raphael suddenly frowned. While Gabriel was deep in thought, the air seemed to tremble slightly. Then, in the holy angel hall, the huge conference table that the seraphs gathered around also trembled slightly, as if there was an earthquake. The entire first heaven is experiencing an earthquake. Gabriel stood up abruptly. On the first day of the heavenly kingdom, the place where all the angels lived, the fairyland that looked like a paradise, started to tremble one after another. Rumble? There was day and night in the heavenly kingdom, which had always been blue and clean, but now it was covered with dark clouds. Lightning flashed and thunder roared. Is it a supreme being? Raphael frowned. Since the last supreme being invaded, her father had strengthened the outer layer of the heavenly kingdom. Even if the supreme beings joined hands to interfere, they couldn't open the door to the heavenly kingdom easily. Without interference, how could the sky change colors and the lightning flash and thunder roar? Rumble? A loud clap of thunder boomed. At this moment, a thick bolt of lightning broke through the layers of clouds in the kingdom of heaven and struck the petitioner's tower with unstoppable force. Boom! The petitioner tower released dazzling light. However, after receiving this lightning bolt, the purest light of faith in the petitioner tower dimmed significantly. In the holy angel hall, the expressions of the seraphs changed slightly. Even the archangel who was covered in silver armor clenched his fists and crushed a corner of the table. Rage. Damn it! Is it a supreme being again? This is the most serious provocation to the heavenly kingdom. Instantly, a large number of angels shot up into the sky from the heavenly kingdom. However, in the dark clouds that shrouded the entire heavenly kingdom, lightning bolts flashed everywhere like a pool of lightning. Countless huge lightning dragons swam in the pool of lightning. The momentum was so great that even the angels, who had never felt fear in their hearts, instinctively felt fear at this moment. Their faces all turned deathly pale. However, the dark clouds in the sky gradually dispersed. It came suddenly and left strangely. After all, it only struck the petitioner tower once. Only the petitioner tower? The archangel frowned and rushed to the petitioner tower from the holy angel hall. Soon the archangel returned. Raphael and Gabriel walked up at the same time. What happened? The archangel said in a low voice. The newborn saint's soul disappeared. What? Eden. In the beautiful sea of flowers, a lazy figure slowly got up from the flower bed. A huge snake slithered around her and coiled into a seat, slowly lifting her up. She looked at the withered figure sitting quietly in the sea of flowers with a smile. You seem to be called John, right? His chosen replacement. Something interesting seems to be happening outside, but it doesn't seem to have alarmed you? The withered figure slowly opened her eyes. Before Father left, he asked me to stay in Eden. I can only stay in Eden. If the heavenly kingdom wasn't in a life or death situation, why would I leave? You're quite calm. Cleopatra suddenly chuckled and said, He chose you correctly. If there were more people like you in the heavenly kingdom, it might have improved. The withered figure said indifferently, I am the best child of Father. Cleopatra said indifferently, I'm afraid that someone has attacked too many worlds. He doesn't even know that he's inflated. The withered figure was silent for a moment, then slowly said, Ms. Cleopatra, it seems that you know where the malice that's wreaking havoc in the heavenly kingdom comes from? You treat this as malice? Cleopatra shook her head slowly. You may not know what the real malice is, but it's fine, you can treat it as malice. As she said that, under the puzzled gaze of the withered figure, Cleopatra suddenly stretched and yawned. It seems that I can take a vacation without waiting for the contract to expire. I'm really looking forward to it. The withered figure frowned again. Cleopatra slowly sank into the sea of flowers. At the moment when she was about to disappear, her voice suddenly sounded. Although I'm not very clear about what the archangel did, I'll give you a very sincere advice, since this sea of flowers allows me to sleep comfortably. Please go ahead. The withered figure. Hardadef's expression was slightly dignified. Go and apologize. Use the soul of this archangel. The beautiful figure disappeared just like that. The huge snake in the sea of flowers also disappeared. Hardadef couldn't help but fall into contemplation. In the deep sea, in the depths where the sun's light couldn't reach, a huge light shadow was moving forward in the darkness. The sapphire. Suddenly, the speed of the sapphire gradually decreased. Finally, it stopped in front of a huge trench. So, the voice of the undersea city emperor sounded in the ears of everyone who traveled this time. Everyone, we've arrived at the Sonam Trench. Chapter 1698. The hatch at the bottom of the submarine opened, and 6 different types of flying tumblers slowly descended to the bottom of the trench. This thing was obviously for military use, and then it was painted and modified to become the Emperor's toy. Everyone's body was now covered with a thin layer of membrane. It could filter the fresh air directly from the sea and resist part of the pressure in the deep sea. Of course, the flying serpent that could walk directly in the sea was essentially different from the flying serpent that the residents of the underwater city usually used. As for the route this time, the Emperor had already downloaded it on the control panel of each flying tumblers. They would go around the Sonam Trench, and then return here again. Those who wanted to compete in speed could accelerate all the way, and those who just wanted to experience the fun of the flying tumblers could also drive slowly and follow the route back. His Majesty seemed to be treating this trip as an outing. I have ordered the 3rd Legion to clean up this place. Before departure, Louis XXXIX reminded again, but it is not absolutely safe. If there is any danger, just send a signal. There are soldiers of the 3rd Legion stationed along the way. This was the first time Riaz had tried this kind of track outside the underwater city. At this time, he was already eager to give it a try. When Louis XXXIX said start, he immediately drove the new Asla and rushed out like an arrow. In the blink of an eye, he rushed into the depths of the dark trench. Everyone then set off, and soon there was a sequence. At the front, Riaz sprinted at full speed. His Majesty had a smile on his face and followed closely behind. Kong Hai was still running behind Lyoga, neither fast nor slow, as if he was waiting for someone for the 2 behind him. At this time, Boss Luo was actually still trying to control the flying tumblers under the guidance of Miss Maid. There was not much time to learn this thing, but it was obviously not fun to teach once it was learned. In fact, Miss Maid's original intention was to ride with Boss Luo. She was in the front and he was in the back, so it was more convenient to teach. Soon, everyone's flying serpent had completely entered the trench. On the sapphire, in front of the screen in the control room, Professor Kim Kailuan could no longer see everyone clearly with his eyes. He could only see the distance between them through an instrument called a radar. However, Professor Kim Kailuan was thinking about something else. When did Undersea City spend so much effort to build such a huge submarine sapphire? Before they set off, Kong Hai had quietly told him that this submarine was built using a combination of magical energy technology and another technology that was different from the one used in the underwater city. This technology was different from the magical energy of the underwater city. It seemed to be a pure mechanical technology, and many parts were cumbersome. If this submarine was built using magical energy technology, it was obvious that the size of the submarine could be reduced by 1/3, and its performance would be improved. The professor did not want to think about why he had to use mechanical technology to delay the problem of magic energy technology. What he was thinking about at this time was why the people of Undersea City on this submarine could operate so skillfully. In such a huge submarine, there were at least thousands of people. It was not as simple as learning from the manual. It required thousands of people to train together to be able to command the submarine as one. However, at this moment, the door of the control room suddenly opened. A person that Professor Kim Kailuan did not expect walked in slowly, accompanied by several heavily armed military police. Kaya? The professor's gaze froze. He could not hide the shock in his heart. Why are you here? Hello, Professor Kim Kailuan. I'm glad to see you here. Madame Kaya was expressionless. She even looked at one of the military police beside her and thought for a moment. So, Professor Kim Kailuan is the person who will be working with me this time? The military police did not respond at this time. However, Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but frown. He quickly walked forward. What's going on? A member of the military police said in a deep voice, according to His Majesty's order, the two of you will be escorting the felon Longgang to the Siren tribe. We will also follow to ensure that the handover is completed smoothly. With that, the military police immediately stood at attention and saluted. Longgang. Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but widen his eyes. He looked at the calm Kaya before him, but he was unable to remain calm inside. What is this? This is a secret order from His Majesty. The military police officer who spoke handed a palm-sized chip to Kaya. Then let's set off now, sirs. A small exploration ship slowly set off from Sapphire. It did indeed follow a different path, slowly entering the trench. Is Longgang really here? Professor Kim Kailuan made his way to Madame Kaya's side and asked softly. Even if Kaya was unable to tell him the truth due to some reason, she could clearly answer a question like this. Unless the so-called handover was a kidnapping in the first place, Longgang was not on the exploration ship. This was a special operation against the Siren tribe. However, why would he and Kaya be in charge of something like this? That did not make sense at all. Yes. Madame Kaya nodded. It's in the lower level of the ship. As if she wanted the professor to believe her, Madame Kaya even turned on the screen. To no surprise, it showed the scene of the exploration ship passing through the lower level. The professor saw Longgang as soon as possible. Longgang was currently trapped in a ball of magic energy, unconscious. What did His Majesty's secret order say? The professor was stern now. The military police said that this is a secret order for you and me. Clearly, I can know about it as well, right? At the same time, Professor Kim Kailuan silently opened his hand before Kaya. There were words written on his hand. If you are constantly being monitored, blink 3 times. Madame Kaya lowered her head and looked at the words on the professor's hand before looking into his eyes. She said indifferently, Master Kim Kailuan, I'm not being monitored at all. You can ask me anything you want. You can ask me anything. Apart from the two of them, there were clearly other members of the military police on this level of the ship. Kaya's voice was not loud, but she did not lower it either. Professor Kim Kailuan's expression immediately changed. However, to his disbelief, even though the military police had clearly heard Kaya's words, they still did not do anything. What did you call me? Professor Kim Kailuan's heart leapt in fright. Kaya had directly called out his other identity. Master Kim Kailuan. Madame Kaya turned on a small screen that resembled a tablet. She looked at the information on it and said, the current person in charge of Destiny is one of the 5 people who founded it. After so many years, the original 5 founders have all passed away one after another. Only you are still alive. Professor Kim Kailuan was still rather calm. The reason for his calmness was that the military police on the ship still did not do anything. He looked into Madame Kaya's eyes coldly. He did not avoid her gaze at all. All of a sudden, a terrifying possibility appeared in Professor Kim Kailuan's mind. Kaya, do you know who you are? Professor Kim Kailuan asked softly. Of course I do, Madame Kaya said indifferently. I am a soldier of the Undersea City Kingdom's government. At the same time, I am a spy sent by Undersea City to infiltrate Destiny. Master, have you forgotten about the destruction of Destiny's base a few days ago? You imprisoned me back then, but you didn't find my corpse, did you? Do you know who Longgang is? The professor fell silent. After a moment of silence, he asked in a rather low voice. A criminal of destiny, Madame Kaya said indifferently. Madame Kaya said indifferently, a lowly sea demon bastard. We saved him from being enslaved by the sea demon race, but not only did he not show any gratitude, he even secretly sided with the sea demon race in an attempt to overturn the peace of the city. I obviously know about traitors like that. Show me the secret decree, Professor Kim Kailuan said hurriedly. He even extended his hand to take the decree from Kaya's hand. He succeeded easily. Kaya did not try to stop him at all. When the contents of the decree entered his mind, Professor Kim Kailuan's expression changed again. He said with a trembling voice, They really did it? Isn't it being installed right now? Madame Kaya pointed at the screen and said indifferently. On the screen, a few members of the military police were operating a robotic arm and slowly cutting open Long Gang's abdomen. Then, they buried something the size of a fist. Long Gang's body had a strong recovery ability, and the wound quickly began to heal. Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but fall to the ground. He looked at Kaya beside him in horror. I see, this was the only possibility he could think of, Kaya's various abnormalities. She had probably been brainwashed by the kingdom's government, by Emperor Louis XXXIX. I can't let such a tragedy happen. Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but roar furiously inside. However, the exploration ship continued to advance. Soon, it slowly entered a cave in the trench. They soon entered a beehive-like world. The professor suddenly sneered. Since you know who I am and have me escort Long Gang, aren't you afraid that I'll ruin your plan? All I have to do is say something to the siren race, and they'll know what your plan is. This is His Majesty's will. Madame Kaya said indifferently, whether you say it or not has nothing to do with me. I only need to carry out this operation according to His Majesty's will. Master, do whatever you want. Professor Kim Kailuan sat weakly in his seat. He felt cold all over. This reminded him of the other founders of Destiny. They had indeed died in the long battle, and only the professor himself had survived. Every one of them had sent out the same final message before they died. Be careful of the Emperor. The professor constantly reminded himself of the terror of the Emperor of the underwater city. Only now did he understand the fear of his companions. Looks like you're a genius who can control Serpent. The Emperor's voice suddenly rang in Riaz's ears. He subconsciously turned his head and found that the Emperor had caught up to him. The Emperor's voice was coming through the communicator. This is a special model for the military. It was only recently developed. Even a well-trained soldier would need at least 3 days to get the hang of it and become proficient in it. Riaz was quite proud of the Emperor's praise. This was basically the mentality of a young man. Your Majesty, let's have a competition to see who can break through the finish line first. Riaz remembered the unfinished race on the World Snake track. He could not help but feel his fighting spirit rising. No rush. Louis XXXIX smiled and said, although I'm looking forward to the competition with you, before that, you still need to defeat another opponent. Opponent? Riaz was stunned. He subconsciously looked back. Other than darkness, he did not see anyone at all. Clearly, whether it was the young girl Riku, Konghai, or the big brother and big sister, they were all left far behind. Riaz was puzzled. But they can't keep up with me now. Your opponent is here. The Emperor suddenly increased the altitude of Serpent and moved out of Riaz's sight. In the end, he disappeared into the darkness. The visibility in the trench was very low. Even with the route map, one had to be careful when traveling. The Emperor's sudden disappearance made Riaz feel uneasy. At this moment, a beam of light shot toward Riaz. Riaz looked at the beam of light and shuddered as if something was driving his body. Riaz forcefully turned the direction of Serpent. The beam of light brushed past him and then shot toward the rock wall on the side of the trench. Suddenly, A turbid and huge stream of water rushed toward Riaz and swept him away. Shocked, Riaz quickly held the new Asla, only to see that a terrifying crater had appeared on the rock wall because of the flash. An attack, or even a sneak attack. A terrifying thought instantly flashed through Riaz's mind. At the same time, a huge shadow slowly appeared in front of Riaz. It soon became dazzling. Looking at this dazzling golden light, Riaz's expression changed slightly. Golden behemoth. The thing that appeared in front of him was serpent, golden behemoth. Riaz, we meet again. His Majesty told me that as long as I can kill you here, I will be the heir to the throne of Underwater City. Then, let us see who is the stronger one. Krypton Gold. Riaz exclaimed. It's you. On top of the golden behemoth. His former classmate and childhood playmate was looking at him with a sneer. His eyes were slightly glowing red. Hashtag. PS. The next chapter will be later. Around 2 or 3 o'clock. Chapter 1699. One was chasing and the other was escaping. The gold giant beast was equipped with many powerful weapons. Now, it had become a terrifying giant beast, just like its name suggested. The new Asla was extremely weak in front of the gold giant beast. Riaz tried to communicate with Krypton King, but no matter what he said, he only received more powerful attacks. Did Krypton King really want to kill him here? There was no doubt about it. The attacks from the gold giant beast would be enough to crush him and the new Asla into pieces. Riaz, don't waste your time. You can't escape. I can escape. Riaz didn't even turn his head as he replied to Krypton King. That's what the villains like to say in the magical movies of the prime time, but the protagonists can escape. If I kill you, I'll be the prince of the underwater city. I'll be the protagonist. Krypton King was furious. Riaz, on the other hand, had already confirmed some things. At this moment, Dorothy was obviously in an abnormal state, just like those contestants in the World Snake racetrack. Riaz subconsciously looked up and wanted to see if there was a strange black ball above him like that day. However, in the environment of the trench, he couldn't see anything other than darkness. He took a deep breath. The darkness of the trench seemed to give him an endless amount of pressure. His thoughts were also compressed. Waves of pain began to fill his eyes. The rebellious heart he felt during the All-Star Flying Statue competition was once again ignited. During this period of time in the palace, Riaz didn't forget what happened that day. It was just that his mother's appearance comforted him a lot, and he calmed down a lot. He really wanted to learn something. However, the treatment that the Emperor gave him gradually diluted the things that happened that day in the All-Star Flying Statue competition. It was only now that Riaz suddenly woke up. The Emperor was still the same Emperor. What have I been doing this week? Riaz was shocked, and then his whole body turned cold. He felt as if he had been possessed for the past week, and he had not forgotten what had happened before. Riaz, where are you running to? Die. Dude, I really don't want to use violence against you. Riaz stopped abruptly and even turned the new Asla around to face the charging gold behemoth. Ah, Riaz, have you finally thought it through? It's good that you've thought it through. Let me use the gold tier behemoth to crush your body. Riaz took a deep breath and rode his new Asla toward the gold giant beast at full speed. They collided. This was a duel that tested the courage of both sides. Only the loser would change direction, and the winner would persevere until the end. You want to shake my gold giant beast with your little flying serpent? It's been reforged by the School of Magic. Riaz, you've lost. A loss is a loss. Bang! The new Asla and the new golden giant beast collided fiercely. At the last moment, neither of them dodged. The moment they collided, the new Asla's head was instantly crushed into a lump. Riaz's body was directly thrown forward. But at this moment, Riaz reached out and grabbed the barrel of the golden giant beast tightly. While he was throwing the golden giant beast, he spun it and used the momentum to directly pounce on Kor-Du Kim. His fist slammed into Krakow Duo Jin's cheek. Because of the thin film, Krakow Duo Jin was not seriously injured, but the impact directly knocked him out of his seat. Kor-Du Kim, wake up. If you don't wake up, I'll beat you until you wake up. These days, he was beaten up by the girl, Ariel. Although he still couldn't catch up with her, Riaz's combat ability had improved a lot. He grabbed Kor-Du Kim's collar with one hand and clenched his fist. While he was throwing Kor-Du Kim, he continuously punched Kor-Du Kim's face. The golden giant beast lost control and directly crashed into the rock wall of the trench together with Asla. Under the huge impact, the golden giant beast was directly embedded into the rock wall, and Riaz and Kor-Du Kim directly fell into the deeper part of the trench. Up above, Louis XXXIX was riding on his dragon-shaped serpent. He looked down with an expressionless face. At this moment, a figure appeared beside His Majesty the Emperor. The girl, Ariel, had also arrived on her personal serpent. Looking at the abyss of the trench, Ariel shook her head and said, "Friends killing each other, life and death still can't activate his blue blood. It seems that he has indeed successfully fused with the blue blood, but it's clearly just a fusion. After all, it's not royal blood, so there's no other way. Louis, don't waste your time on him. Don't you think that even if he didn't use the power of the blue blood, Riaz wouldn't have been beaten passively this time?" Louis XXXIX suddenly smiled and said, "He should have this kind of courage and ruthlessness." Ariel shook her head. "Louis, if this Riaz can successfully fuse with the blue blood, then perhaps he can also fuse with others. During this period of time, I've looked through all the records of Astral 6. Right now, I have a copy of the information on Yosher's transformation of Riaz. What do you want to do?" His Majesty glanced at the girl. Ariel said indifferently, "His mother is a hybrid of a siren. That's very simple. We'll do everything according to this information. Find a siren hybrid woman and mate with a man in the underwater city, give birth to a descendant, and then fuse with the blue blood. If one doesn't work, we'll do 2. If 2 doesn't work, we'll do 3. With so many test subjects, we'll be able to get 1 or 2 more excellent ones no matter what." However, seeing how His Majesty did not react at all, she could not help but frown. "Why, you're not willing." "How could I be?" His Majesty smiled at this moment. "We'll do as you say. It's just that I don't want to give up on him right now. In any case, it will take some time to implement your plan from now on. Only then will there be new result. As a result, why don't we use this free time to experiment a little more? As long as you agree." The girl nodded and then said, "Something might have happened to Kaya. After all, it's not within the underwater city. I'll go take a look." "Be careful," His Majesty said softly. Ariel immediately left on serpent. Louis XXXIX looked at the path behind him. There were still traces of Boss Luo and the other 2. His Majesty shook his head and said rather helplessly, "What a leisurely person." At this moment, the black dragon serpent under His Majesty swayed gently a few times before spreading its wings and rapidly falling into the abyss of the trench. The exploration ship finally landed in a place with many pillar-shaped rocks that crisscrossed like a spiderweb. This was already the depths of the underwater mine. Many traces of mining could be seen. Professor Kim Kailuan silently walked off the exploration ship. Or rather, he was pointed at by the military police behind him, and walked off the ship. Kaya was indeed the leader of the Dragon's Ridge this time. She could command these military police as she wished. How could she not be able to command them? She had already been brainwashed by the kingdom's government. Her loyalty to His Majesty was probably enough to make her sell her life for him. Dragon's Ridge was also pushed out. When Professor Kim Kailuan saw Dragon's Ridge, he was slightly excited. All these years, he had poured a lot of effort into Dragon's Ridge. The two of them were both friends and teacher. Professor Kim Kailuan even hoped that Dragon's Ridge could succeed him and become the new leader of Destiny. However, Dragon's Ridge's eyes were lifeless. He was like a walking corpse being pushed by the military police from behind. His previous high-spirited appearance had already disappeared. The professor kept recalling the contents of the secret decree. According to His Majesty's decree, a special virus would be planted in Dragon's Ridge's body. The infection rate of this virus on the Siren clan was almost 100%. After the Siren clan took back Dragon's Ridge, if they brought him back to their nest, it would be a terrifying disaster for the Siren clan. Over the years, the Siren clan had been hiding in the deep sea, constantly looking for opportunities to attack Undersea City. It was not that Undersea City did not have the ability to fight back. After so many years of attacks and invasions, the Siren clan, on the other hand, had long been exhausted and greatly damaged after so many years. There was a branch of the Siren clan that had split off from Heidi City. Until today, most of the bloodlines had disappeared because of fighting. Living in the deep sea, there was no safe harbor like Heidi City. Under the crisis of a declining population, the Siren clan had to carry out alternative reproduction. They even used some suitable creatures in the deep sea as breeding grounds for their offspring. This was also the reason why the Siren clan's appearance was so strange. Back then, the Lemurian bloodline was constantly diluted and mixed with the bloodline of the deep-sea creatures. Professor Kim Kailuan could not help but wonder whether there were still pure-blooded Lemurians among the Siren clan today. However, this evolutionary route also had its advantages. For example, the Siren clan could fully adapt to the environment of the deep sea. No matter how harsh the conditions were, they could survive. However, the Siren clan's nest was still a mystery. Even the kingdom's government had not been able to find the Siren clan's nest, the place they called the Holy Land. Long Gang was a child from the Siren clan's Holy Land. The Siren clan had spent a lot of effort to cultivate a hybrid in order to infiltrate Undersea City. The professor could vaguely guess that Long Gang had a special identity among the Siren clan, but he did not know what Long Gang's identity was. However, since the Emperor's secret edict said that Long Gang was very likely to be taken back to the Siren clan's Holy Land, Professor, have you thought it through? Madame Kaya's voice suddenly rang in Professor Kim Kailuan's ears. Thought about what? The professor was shocked, but he did not show it. Madame Kaya said calmly, when you meet the Siren clan later, do you plan to complete this mission or tell them about His Majesty's plan in front of the Siren clan's emissary? Of course it's to complete the Emperor's plan. Professor Kim Kailuan said expressionlessly, no matter how many secrets the kingdom knows about me, you're wrong about one thing. What is it? Kaya turned around. The professor said calmly, Destiny has indeed always been working to overthrow the Emperor's rule in Undersea City. However, our goal is only to free ourselves from the Emperor's rule, not to destroy Undersea City. In essence, I am still a citizen of Undersea City. The Siren clan is Undersea City's greatest enemy, and they always want to destroy Undersea City. I can still tell the difference between right and wrong. Is that so? Madame Kaya smiled. I hope it's really as you say, Professor. Professor Kim Kailuan shook his head and said softly, I hope you can also tell the difference between right and wrong one day. Madame Kaya said calmly, I've always been very clear. At this moment, a member of the military police rushed back. Madame Kaya, we've discovered a group of Siren ahead. They should be here to take Long Gang's team back. Madame Kaya asked directly, what kind of Siren are they? The member quickly said, there are 3 giant shark Siren warriors and a group of nightmare Siren. There are about 30 of them. Apart from that, there's also a Siren being protected. It seems to be the Siren clan's royal family. Royal family? Madame Kaya looked back and looked at Long Gang, who had completely collapsed from the mental torture. She sneered. I'm rather curious about this guy's true identity now. He actually has the Siren clan's royal family personally come to take him back. Madam Kaya, the Siren clan has clearly come prepared this time, the member of the military police said worriedly. However, with our current manpower and equipment, I'm afraid. What are you afraid of? Madam Kaya said sternly. The Third Army is right outside. Once something happens here, the Siren clan won't be able to escape. As for us, what do we have to fear for Undersea City? The military police all stood at attention with their spears raised, cheering loudly for Undersea City. Professor Kim Kailuan sighed at this moment. Right, the Third Army is currently scattered across the entire trench. The Siren clan won't be able to escape at all, which is why the Emperor doesn't care if he changes sides or not. If he changes sides, he won't be able to escape either. Let's go. Let's go meet these worms of the deep sea, Madam Kaya ordered, and everyone continued forward with Long Gang. The distance between the two parties was marked on the control panel of Flying Serpent. Riaz seems to have stopped moving. Miss May drove Flying Serpent to Boss Luo's side and said softly. Boss Luo looked at the distance between the two parties. It was very far. As expected, he couldn't compare to an experienced driver. He was a newbie. However, at the same time, Kong Hai also stopped. Boss Luo quickly drove Flying Serpent to Kong Hai's side. Mr. Kong Hai, is there anything I can help you with? Luoqiu asked curiously. Kong Hai was silent at first. After a while, he looked in a certain direction and thought for a while. I think I've been here before. Is that so? Boss Luo said, then? Here. Kong Hai pointed at a certain spot in the darkness. There's something there. It seems to be calling me. Then, he directly headed in that direction, activated Flying Serpent and dived down. Boss Luo looked at Miss Maid and smiled. It seems that His Majesty has arranged a lot of activities for this excursion. I really want to go to either side. What should I do when I'm greedy? Two shadows overflowed from Luoqiu's back and floated in different directions. Boss Luo 2, Boss Luo 3, all went together. Hashtag PS Sadface 3880 seconds. Chapter 1700. Different from the other Sea Demon clan, the royal family of the Sea Demon clan looked closer to the people of Underwater City. The royal family had a thick layer of cuticle on their skin. Even their faces were the same. They looked extremely rough. The royal family looked more like the statue of the ancestor of the Sea Demon clan that stood at the entrance of Underwater City. This seemed to be the result of purposely maintaining the purity of their bloodline. This time, the one who came to take over Longgang was the 20th Prince of the Sea Demon King. Although he was called the 20th Prince, his status was only slightly higher than some elite Sea Demon warriors. This 20th Prince was probably at the edge of the royal power of the Sea Demon Royal Court. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come here and carried out this dangerous mission. With the grudge between Underwater City and the Sea Demon clan, the entire Sea Demon clan probably wouldn't believe that this kind of mission wasn't dangerous. Prince Bacha's face didn't look good on the way here. He was recommended by his brothers to carry out this mission. Otherwise, he would still be in his own territory. He had already left that place. He only wanted to manage his territory well and let the people in the tribe live a peaceful life. Every time the Sea Demon clan launched a large-scale attack on Underwater City, they would definitely draw troops from various territories. However, over the years, the number of soldiers contributed by the 20th Prince's territory had never reached the average number. This seemed to be the reason why he was hated by the other princes. What should they do if the soldiers contributed by the 20th Prince weren't enough? The Sea Demon Royal Court, which was anxious to go to war, naturally increased the number of soldiers from the territories of the other princes or lords. Although this was the real reason, the 20th Prince Bacha really couldn't explain it. His territory was in fact the closest to Somna Trench. It was more or less in front of his own home. Because of this, the royal court's attitude was that if they didn't send him, who else could they send? Your Highness, there's movement in front. It should be the people of Underwater City. The voice of his subordinate came. The 20th Prince also recovered from his daze and lazily ordered, "Send a nightmare sea demon to contact the people of Underwater City first. If there's no problem, bring him here for the handover. I really don't want to go any further. I'll just wait here." His Highness had always been very lazy, this was a well-known fact. However, this time, the soldiers that were dispatched were all from the 20th Prince's territory. The sea demons were absolutely loyal to their lord, so they did not say anything. Soon, a nightmare sea demon took the lead. The rest of the sea demon warriors quickly cleared out a place for the 20th Prince to rest. Several giant shark sea demons quickly dug out a cave and covered it with a kind of deep-sea algae. Inside the cave, Prince Ba Sha was squatting with his hands tucked into his sleeves. His clothes were different from those of the Siren clan, which were mostly made of fish skin. It was obviously made of some kind of woven fabric. It wrapped the whole body and the sleeves were unusually wide. Prince Ba Sha once picked up a scroll of animal skin when he was taking a stroll at the bottom of the sea. It seemed to come from the ground. Prince Ba Sha immediately felt that it looked good, so he spent a long time asking the people in his territory to work together to make one. The 20th Prince always wore it. When it was torn, he would sew it up. When it was torn, he would sew it up. When it was torn, he would sew it up again. At this time, Prince Ba Sha threw out something from his sleeve. It was a metal box that was only the size of a palm. This was the thing that was urgently sent from the Sea Demon Royal Court this time. It was used to exchange for Long Gang, whose identity had been exposed and was captured by the Underwater City's government. Prince Ba Sha did not know what was inside the metal box. He had carefully studied the metal box, but he could not find a way to open it. This metal box seemed to be a hole, and there was no gap to be found. However, there was definitely something inside because the prince shook it when he held it. What is this thing? What is Long Gang's real identity? Prince Ba Sha murmured, if only there was a bed here. He found that he had been away from the palace for too long. Now, he was somewhat out of touch. Otherwise, he would not have been sent here. He was suspected of being used as cannon fodder. Prince Ba Sha began to think. Prince Ba Sha's thinking had reached the climax. Prince Ba Sha let out a sound of snoring. Your Highness, the people from the Underwater City are here. Your Highness. The voice of the giant shark sea monster suddenly came. The bubble that the 20th Prince blew out of his nose suddenly burst. The prince opened his eyes and found that he was still squatting in the cave that was covered in algae. He couldn't help but be shocked. He quickly stood up, tidied up the patched robe on his body, and then hurriedly walked out. Have we arrived? Come, all of you, get into formation. We came in small numbers this time, but we can't let the people from the Underwater City know that I don't have many subordinates. Keep your eyes open. Prince Ba Sha's voice froze there. Not far ahead, a group of people from the Underwater City, who were not much more than this group, were stunned. They all looked at the sea monster prince strangely. Cough cough. Prince Ba Sha coughed twice. Then, without anyone telling him, he flung his sleeves and put his hands behind his back. He strode forward with his head held high. You are the diplomatic group this time? Madame Kaya turned her head and sized up this sea monster prince. Then, she did not say anything. She only waved her hand. Immediately, 2 soldiers from the Underwater City carried Long Gang and walked forward from the back of the group. He's Long Gang? Prince Ba Sha frowned. Madame Kaya said indifferently, don't you know whether he's Long Gang or not? Prince Ba Sha shook his head. I've never seen him before. I've never even heard of him before. How would I know if you guys from the Underwater City just found someone to pretend to be me? You have to prove to me that this is Long Gang. Otherwise, I won't go through with this transfer. As Professor Kim Kailuan listened, he suddenly realized that the Sea Monster Royal Court might have sent an idiot this time. He suddenly felt that something was off. Logically speaking, if the sea monster royal court valued Long Gang, they should have sent a more reliable envoy. How do you want us to prove it? Madame Kaya frowned. Prince Ba Sha thought for a moment. Then, he stared at Long Gang, who had his head lowered, and walked over. The soldiers of the underwater city raised their magic energy guns and cannons, and aimed them at Prince Ba Sha. However, Prince Ba Sha waved his hand and said unhappily, "What's there to be nervous about? I'm just looking. Can't I just look? Look, I've already walked over alone. What are you afraid of? How cowardly." Madame Kaya waved her hand, and the soldiers lowered their weapons. Prince Ba Sha crouched on the ground and raised his head to look at Long Gang's lowered head. He stared for a long time. Madame Kaya was rather impatient. She said in a low voice, "Are you done looking?" "No." Madame Kaya looked at the sea monster royal court coldly and continued, "Apart from this guy, is there anyone else among you who can make the decision?" A group of sea monster royal court warriors were lazily shaking their heads and yawning. At the very back, there were even two who were curled up on the ground, snoring loudly. "Forget it. Let's leave it at that." Prince Ba Sha stood up and took out the golden box from his sleeve. "This is what you want, right? All right. Give this guy back to me, and our deal is done." Madame Kaya did not take it immediately. She did not understand what Prince Ba Sha was trying to do. His Highness threw the metal box to the ground. "You want me to prove that this box is real? I can't prove it. Besides, you can't prove that this thing is Long Gang, right?" Madame Kaya gave a signal with her eyes, and a sea monster royal court warrior carefully picked up the metal box. She waited for a while, but nothing happened. Madame Kaya thought for a moment and gave the order to release Long Gang. Thus, a sea monster royal court warrior walked over and lifted the muddle-headed Long Gang, carrying him on his back. We got him. Time to go back." Prince Ba Sha nodded with satisfaction. Then, he jumped onto the sea monster royal court warrior who was carrying Long Gang on his back. The prince sat on the sea monster royal court warrior's other shoulder, looking like he was about to leave. Professor Kim Kailuan looked at the deal in disbelief. It was so childish that he did not even know where to start complaining. The tense atmosphere gradually faded away the moment the ocean royalty crawled out of the cave. "Wait!" Professor Kim Kailuan suddenly said. The sea monster royal court warrior, who had already turned around, subconsciously stopped and turned around. Prince Ba Sha, who was sitting on his shoulder, asked in confusion, "What? Is there something else? What do you plan to do with Long Gang after you go back?" Professor Kim Kailuan asked in a deep voice. "How would I know?" Prince Ba Sha replied lazily. "My mission is to send Long Gang back. As for what happens to him after I send him back, what does that have to do with me? Old man, you seem to be very concerned about whether he lives or dies." Professor Kim Kailuan was silent. Beside him, Madame Kaya's eyes flashed with a cold light from time to time. "That's all? If that's all, I'm leaving." Prince Ba Sha shook his head and patted the sea monster royal court warrior's head. Then, the sea monster royal court warrior really left. Professor Kim Kailuan only came back to his senses when he saw the sea monster royal court warrior leave. He looked at Madame Kaya in disbelief. "That's it?" Madame Kaya held the metal box in her hand and muttered, "It seems so. It was quite smooth. But this thing doesn't feel fake." Professor Kim Kailuan frowned. "Didn't the Emperor tell you what was going to be returned to Long Gang?" Madame Kaya said indifferently, "His Majesty didn't say anything. His Majesty only ordered us to return Long Gang to the sea monster royal court warrior." "He didn't say anything?" Professor Kim Kailuan fell into deep thought. His intuition told him that Louis XXXIX was not so simple. However, at this moment, some tremors indeed came from the bottom of his feet. Then, a stalagmite fell from above and almost hit Professor Kim Kailuan. The professor was shocked. He saw that the surroundings were trembling, and the stone pillars that took tens of thousands of years to form began to fall. "Oh no, this place is going to collapse," Professor Kim Kailoan yelled. However, as soon as he finished speaking, he heard chaotic footsteps coming from the front. Everyone looked over and saw that the Sea Demon Royal was actually returning with a group of sea demons at this time. Madame Kaya waved her hand, and a group of heavily armed warriors from the underwater city immediately raised their weapons and aimed, waiting for the order to fire. "Run! Run!" The royal family of the Siren tribe stood on the shoulder of giant Shark Kwai and waved his hand while yelling, "Run! There's a demon! Quick!" A demon? Everyone from the underwater city was stunned. There really seemed to be a pair of enormous eyes behind the sea monster royal court. It was an enormous head, and it was smashing through the path behind the sea monster royal court. When the so-called demon beast opened its huge mouth, it was wide enough to swallow the entire sea demon tribe's envoys whole. At this moment, 4 thick and long tentacles suddenly shot out from the ground, directly sweeping up 4 nightmare sea monsters and sending them into the demon's mouth, directly swallowing them. The fiendish demon's breath was like a ring, and its 3 layers of sharp teeth were like a grinder. In an instant, the bodies of the nightmare sea demons were shredded into pieces. The scene was very comfortable. Madame Kaya? A member of the military police looked at Kaya with cold sweat, waiting for the order to fire. Madame Kaya sucked in a deep breath and suddenly turned around. She yelled, "Let's go!" The enormous creature that had appeared in the abandoned mine was clearly not something they could take down with the equipment they had on hand. They could only run for their lives. Boss Luo and the servant girl discovered the serpent that Kong Hai had left behind in a huge crack in the wall. Kong Hai was not there. Clearly, he had entered the huge crack. He had said that something was calling him, so he had followed the call deeper in. After some thought, Boss Luo placed the serpent there as well. The servant girl waved her hand, and a gentle yellow light lit up in the dark crack ahead. The crack was like a long corridor. Boss Luo walked through it and saw a large number of skeletons buried in the walls on both sides. The skeletons were all different. They did not seem to belong to the same creature, but they were all extremely large, like some kind of huge beast.